Nobody gets left behind on my road. He said it quietly, almost to himself, as he knelt beside a man who was dying in the dirt, a man he had never met, a man who had nothing to offer him, a man who had probably spent his whole life afraid of people who looked exactly like him. Jackson Cole could have kept riding. Nobody would have blamed him. The highway was empty. The desert didn't care. But something made him stop, and that single moment would unravel a conspiracy, expose a cover-up, and remind an entire country that the most dangerous thing about a man isn't always what you think it is. This story moves you if you believe that one act of courage can change everything. Subscribe to this channel right now and follow every part of this journey until the very end. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Let's begin. The afternoon that Jackson Cole almost didn't stop was the same afternoon that saved Emily Carter's life. That afternoon was July 14th. The temperature in the Arizona desert had broken 110 degrees by noon, and by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the asphalt on Highway 87 was hot enough to blister the skin off your hand if you touched it without thinking. The air tasted like copper. The sky had that bleached, washed-out white that told you the sun wasn't just shining, it was punishing. Jackson had been riding for 4 hours without stopping. That was not unusual for him. Since his wife Carol had passed away 22 months earlier, Jackson Cole had developed a habit of putting as many miles between himself and his own front door as physically possible. It wasn't running away. He would have pushed back hard against anyone who called it that. It was more like a man who had discovered that movement was the only medicine that still worked. The bike was moving, his mind had something to do. When the engine was humming underneath him at 70 miles an hour, the silence inside his chest was almost bearable. Almost he rode alone that day. That was also not unusual. The plenty side had. He had brothers, plenty of them men who had known him since he was in his 20s, men who would have ridden with him anywhere if he'd picked up the phone and asked. But Jackson hadn't asked. Lately, he preferred the solitude of a long road over the well-meaning company of men who kept glancing at him sideways, checking to see if he was okay, offering to talk whenever he was ready. He wasn't ready, he was just riding. The highway stretched out ahead of him in a long, shimmering line, heat rising off the blacktop in waves that made the road look like it was underwater. Either side, the desert spread out flat, an enormous saguaro cactus standing like sentinels, scrub brush clinging to cracked red earth, kind of landscape that made you understand immediately why people who got lost out here didn't always come back. Jackson Cole understood that landscape. He had grown up respecting it. That's why, when he saw the SUV sitting dead on the shoulder about a quarter-mile ahead, his attention sharpened before he'd even made a conscious decision to pay attention. Something was wrong. He knew it the way experienced riders know things, not through logic, not through any deliberate process of thought, but through that particular instinct that comes from 30 years of watching roads and reading situations before they fully revealed themselves. The SUV's doors were open. Both of them, driver's side and passenger side, wide open, hanging there in the heat like the vehicle had just been abandoned mid-breath. The engine wasn't running, no hazard lights, and there was nobody visible. On a highway where the nearest town was 43 miles in either direction, an open-doored, empty-looking SUV was not a good sign. Jackson eased off the throttle. He told himself he was just going to slow down. Just take a look. He wasn't stopping. He had learned long ago that stopping on lonely desert highways could go sideways in ways that had nothing to do with good intentions. You didn't know what you were pulling up on. You didn't know the situation. He had brothers who had stories about stopping to help and finding themselves in the middle of something they hadn't bargained for. He slowed down to 40, then 30, then 20. That's when he heard it. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was so thin and weak that the wind nearly swallowed it completely. But Jackson Cole had spent decades training himself to hear things that other people missed. And what he heard in that moment was a human voice barely calling for help from somewhere behind the vehicle. He stopped the bike. He sat there for 3 seconds. 3 full seconds, the engine idling under him, his hands still on the grips, his boots on the ground. 3 seconds is a long time when you're deciding whether to get involved. Swung off the bike. Weeks later, when reporters would ask him about this moment, Jackson would struggle to explain exactly what made him move. He was not a man who talked easily about the things that moved him from the inside. He would deflect, would make a joke, would shrug his big shoulders and say something gruff about how any decent person would have done the same thing. But the truth was simpler and more private than that. Truth was that he heard that voice, thin, desperate female, and it reached something in him that had been closed up for a very long time. He moved because he couldn't not move. Because staying on that bike while a human being called for help from the dirt would have been a different kind of dying, and he had already experienced enough of that to last a lifetime. He walked around the back of the SUV. He was not prepared for what he found there. Emily Carter was 28 years old, and she was kneeling on the ground with her father's head in her lap. And her face, when she looked up at Jackson, was the face of someone who had already started to accept that help was not coming. She was young, blonde, sunburned across her cheekbones in a way that told him she'd been out here for a while, at least an hour, probably more. Her eyes were dark with something that sat right on the border between fear and desperation. And when she looked up and saw Jackson Cole, 6 feet 2 inches of leather and patches and hard-lived life, he watched those eyes make a decision about him in about half a second. She flinched, not dramatically, not a full recoil, just a tiny involuntary tightening of her whole body, a split second pulling inward that she immediately tried to cover. She failed to cover it. Jackson noticed. He always noticed things like that. What surprised him more than he would ever let on, was the small, sharp flicker of pain that registered somewhere in his chest when he saw it. All these years, you'd think a man would stop feeling that. You'd think a man would get used to people looking at him like he was something dangerous until he proved otherwise. Truth was that Jackson Cole had never fully gotten used to it. He had simply learned to carry the weight of other people's fear without letting it show on his face. He kept his hands visible, consciously, deliberately, both palms open and away from his body as he approached. It was a habit he developed over decades, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. He had learned that the fastest way to get past someone's fear was to give them nothing new to be afraid of. "Hey," he said. His voice was low and calm, the voice he used when situations required steadiness more than anything else. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." "What happened?" Emily swallowed. Her throat was working hard dry, clearly. She had been crying at some point, but the tears had stopped, maybe because her body didn't have the water to spare for them anymore. "My dad," she said. "He was trying to fix the car, and he went down. Just collapsed. I don't know how long we've been out here. My phone, I can't get a signal. I've been trying." She stopped, pressed her lips together. Jackson recognized that particular pause, the pause of a person who is holding themselves together through sheer force of will and knows that if they say too much, the will might crack. "Okay," he said. He was already moving closer, already looking at the man in her lap. "What's your name?" "Emily." "Emily." "I'm Jackson." He crouched down. "Your dad?" "Thomas. Thomas Carter." Thomas Carter was in his late 50s or early 60s. It was hard to tell with certainty because heat sickness had aged his features in the last hour or two. Skin was wrong. That was the first thing Jackson registered. Too dry, too tight across the bones of his face, and it had taken on a grayish undertone that didn't belong there. Breathing was coming, in short, shallow installments. When Jackson put 2 fingers against the man's wrist, pulse he found was fast and thin and ready, the pulse of a body that was working too hard to compensate for something it was losing. Heat exhaustion, borderline heat stroke. Jackson had seen it before. He knew exactly how fast it could move from serious to fatal. "How long has he been unconscious?" Jackson asked. Voice stayed level. He needed Emily level too, and the surest way to panic a frightened person further was to let your own voice climb. Maybe 20 minutes? "He was talking to me, and then he sat down, and then he was on the ground, and I couldn't." Her voice broke. She steadied it. "I couldn't move him by myself. He's too big, and it was too hot, and I didn't know what to do." "You did the right thing," Jackson said immediately. "You kept him in the shade of the car. You stayed with him. You did exactly right." He looked up at her directly. "Emily, I need you to listen to me now. Can you do that?" She nodded. "Your dad is alive. His pulse is there. He's not dead, and he's not going to die today, but we have to move fast, you understand? I need you with me." "Are you with me?" Something changed in her eyes. The desperation was still there, but underneath it, something else clicked into place. Foothold, a direction. Yes, she said, tell me what to do. Jackson's saddlebags had not been packed for a medical emergency. They had been packed the way a man packs when he intends to ride hard and stop, rarely minimal clothing, some tools, a road atlas that he carried for reasons that were more sentimental than practical in the age of GPS. Jackson Cole had learned something in 3 decades of riding through remote terrain. You prepared for trouble because trouble had a way of finding you whether you prepared for it or not. Carried water. 2 large insulated bottles. He always carried water. He carried a small emergency kit with basic supplies. Carried a reflective emergency blanket folded into a square no bigger than a paperback book that he had never once used and had always hoped he never would. He used it now. Within the first 4 minutes of arriving at that SUV, Jackson had created a makeshift shade structure using the reflective blanket and 2 bungee cords from his kit propped against the side of the vehicle to extend the shadow over Thomas's body and get him out of direct sunlight. It wasn't much, it was enough. Don't give him too much water at once, Jackson told Emily, keeping his voice instructional and steady. Small sips slow. If he swallows too fast, he'll throw it up and he'll lose more than he gains. Just a little at a time. Emily did exactly as he told her, cradling her father's head and coaxing water past his lips in careful, patient increments. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her focus was absolute. Jackson watched her out of the corner of his eye and registered something that he found unexpectedly moving. The quality of her attention to her father was fierce and complete. Whatever she had felt when she first looked up and saw him approaching, she had set it aside. She was here now, fully here, doing what needed to be done. He respected that. He pulled out his phone. The signal out here was intermittent at best, but there was a trick to it movement. He moved the phone in a slow arc. Sometimes you could catch a bar or two for just long enough to push a call through. Walked away from the vehicle in a slow semicircle, phone held up, watching the signal indicator. 1 bar appeared, disappeared, appeared again. He dialed 911. Call connected on the 3rd ring, broke up twice in the first 20 seconds, and then steadied enough to be useful. Jackson gave their location mile marker 97 on Highway 87, south of Payson, described Thomas's symptoms with the brisk, factual efficiency of a man who had been in enough emergencies to know that dispatchers needed data, drama. Dispatcher told him an ambulance could be there in approximately 40 minutes, given the distance. 40 minutes. Jackson hung up and walked back to the vehicle. Coming, he said. 40 minutes. Emily looked up. 40 minutes. She repeated it like she was calculating something. Okay, we can do 40 minutes. We can do 40 minutes, Jackson confirmed. He settled down on the ground beside Thomas and did what he had always done best in the moments that required it most. He stayed. Thomas Carter began to regain consciousness about 12 minutes later. It was gradual, a shifting of the features first, a small tightening around the eyes, and then a long, disoriented moment where he was present enough to open his eyes, but not yet anchored enough to make sense of what he was seeing. He saw Jackson Cole first. The reaction was instinctive and immediate. Thomas's eyes went wide and his whole body stiffened. He made a sound, a short, sharp exhalation, somewhere between a gasp and a grunt, and tried to push himself upright, despite the fact that every muscle in his body was currently staging a protest against exactly that kind of movement. Whoa, Jackson said. Easy, easy, friend, you're okay. Dad. Emily's hands were on Thomas's shoulders, steady and firm. Dad, it's okay. He helped us. He called for help. It's okay. Thomas blinked. Once. Twice. His eyes moved from Jackson to Emily and back to Jackson again, making the trip several times while his brain worked to catch up with the information his eyes were feeding it. Hell's Angels, Thomas said. His voice was rough as gravel, barely above a whisper, but the recognition in it was unmistakable. Yeah, Jackson said. He met the older man's gaze without blinking, without defensiveness. That's right, a beat of silence. Thomas let out a long, slow breath. Some of the stiffness went out of his shoulders. You stopped, Thomas said. Stop, Jackson agreed. Most people don't. There was something in Thomas's voice when he said it, not bitterness exactly, but something seasoned and tired, The statement of a man who had spent enough time in difficult situations to have calibrated his expectations of human behavior downward over the years. Jackson looked at him for a moment. Most people are afraid of what stopping might cost them, he said quietly. I've been afraid of a lot of things in my life. This particular thing wasn't one of them. Thomas held his gaze. Something passed between them in that moment, some wordless acknowledgement, the kind of recognition that happens sometimes between people who have lived through things that cannot be easily explained to people who haven't. Thomas Carter, the older man said. He extended a hand. Jackson Cole, Jackson said. He took it. Emily watched the two men shake hands and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't even realized had been clenched. The next 30 minutes were both simple and impossible in the way that waiting always is when the stakes are high enough. Jackson kept talking to Thomas, not excessively, not in the forced, overly cheerful way of someone trying to paper over a crisis with noise, but steadily, the measured rhythm of a man who understood that consciousness required anchoring. The best anchor available right now was the sound of a steady human voice. He asked Thomas about Arizona. He asked how long they'd been driving. He let Thomas answer in fragments, slow, labored sentences of a man still recalibrating. He listened to those fragments, the way he listened to everything, with the full weight of his attention. Emily sat on Thomas's other side. She had stopped shaking. Fear was still there, Tade. The fear was to watching your father die on the side of a desert highway and walk away from the experience without carrying some of it in your body for a while. But she had moved through it somehow, gotten to the other side of the worst of it, and what remained now was a kind of quiet, stripped-down clarity. She found herself watching Jackson Cole. She was not sure what she had expected. The leather vest was exactly what she'd imagined. The patches, the insignia, the wear and the weight of years worked into every inch of it. He looked exactly like the thing that people warned you about when they told you stories about bikers on empty desert roads. His hands, when he had set up that shade structure, had been careful and precise. Voice had been calm when the entire reasonable universe of her experience suggested that calm was the last thing available in that moment. The neon sign outside had, and when he had looked at her father, when he had checked Thomas's pulse and assessed the situation with those sharp, steady eyes, she had seen something in his face that she hadn't expected to see. Genuine concern. Not the performed concern of someone who wanted to be seen helping. Real concern. The kind that came from somewhere unguarded. She thought about the stories she had heard, the things people said, the reputation that arrived before the reality, the way it always did, painting the picture so completely that by the time you were actually looking at the man, you were somehow seeing the story instead. She had been afraid when she looked up and saw him. She was no longer afraid. She was not entirely sure what she was instead grateful was obvious, but it felt insufficient. Shaken, maybe. Recalibrated. As though some equation she had been working with for a long time had just revealed a variable she hadn't known was missing. Can I ask you something, she said. Jackson glanced at her. Go ahead. Why did you stop? She wasn't being confrontational. The question was genuine, a woman trying to understand a thing that had not fit the shape of what she thought she knew about the world. I'm glad you did. I'm just asking. You didn't know us. You didn't owe us anything. You could have kept riding, Jackson said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. The way he went quiet was particular, not evasive, but considered. Quiet of a man who took questions seriously enough to think before he answered them. My wife passed away almost 2 years ago, he said finally. Carol, she was everything, you know? The kind of person who made a room better just by walking into it. He stopped, started again. After she died, I spent a long time riding, not going anywhere, just riding, trying to outrun something that doesn't have legs, which means you never actually outrun it, but I kept trying anyway. Emily listened without speaking. One night, I was about 200 miles from home, Jackson continued. Engine was running fine, road was good, I had no reason to stop. Something made me stop at this gas station outside of Tucson. And there was a kid there, couldn't have been more than 19, 20 years old, sitting on the curb behind the station in the dark, just sitting there. He paused. I almost didn't say anything. I almost got back on the bike, but I sat down next to him instead, and we talked for about 2 hours. What was wrong with him? Emily asked. Everything, Jackson said simply. The kind of everything that, at 20 years old, feels like it will never get better. He looked down at his hands. Don't know for certain that I helped him, but I know that I stayed. Sometimes staying is the whole thing. He looked up. So when I heard a voice calling for help out here, I stopped. Because somebody stayed once when it mattered to me, and I made myself a promise after that night in Tucson that I would pay that forward every chance I got. He shrugged, a small, slightly self-conscious motion. Today was a chance. Emily was quiet for a long moment. I thought you were going to be dangerous, she said. I know, Jackson said. I'm sorry. Don't apologize for it, he said. And there was no judgment in his voice, only something older and more complicated. The world teaches people to be afraid of what they don't understand. That's not your fault. That's just how the world works. A pause. The only thing any of us can do is give people reasons to revise their understanding. Thomas, who had been listening with his eyes half open in the careful way of a man conserving energy while still tracking the conversation around him, made a sound that was almost a laugh. Son, he said to Jackson, his voice still rough but stronger now than it had been, spent 31 years as a firefighter. I have known a lot of men in my life who talked about values and a lot fewer who actually had them. He paused. You're one of the fewer. Jackson looked at the older man for a moment. Then he reached out and put a hand briefly on Thomas's shoulder, just for a moment, firm and warm and wordless, and then withdrew it. Rest, he said. Ambulance is coming. Before the ambulance came, before the red and white lights appeared as a shimmer on the horizon, before the sound of the siren began its faint approach across the desert miles, something happened that Jackson Cole had not anticipated. Thomas Carter, lying on the hot ground with his daughter beside him and a stranger's emergency blanket overhead, turned his head toward Jackson and said something that would pull the rest of this story from the simple highway to something far more complicated. Jackson, Thomas said. His voice was quiet, careful, the voice of a man who had made a decision. Jackson looked at him. I need to tell you something. Thomas paused, swallowed. Eyes moved to Emily briefly, and she gave him a small nod, the nod of someone who already knew what he was about to say and had already decided it was time. Our breakdown wasn't an accident. Jackson went still. What do you mean, he said, not a question. A prompt, careful, flat tone of a man who wanted to be certain he had heard correctly. Car was fine when we left Phoenix this morning. 4 hours later, in the middle of the Arizona desert, the engines just dies? No warning lights. No overheating gauge. Thomas's jaw tightened. I know cars. Spent my whole life around machinery. That engine was fine. Dad, Emily said very quietly. He should know, Thomas said to her. Then back to Jackson, I found something. Evidence. About a company, a corporation that covered up an industrial accident 8 years ago. 4 firefighters died. Good men. Men I worked with. His eyes held Jackson steadily, despite everything his body was still working through. I have been quietly putting together documentation for the last 3 years. 2 weeks ago, I made contact with a journalist. Now your car breaks down, Jackson said. In the middle of nowhere, Thomas said. On a day when the temperature is over 110 degrees. The silence between them was different now, heavier. Jackson looked at Thomas for a long moment. Then he looked at Emily. Her face confirmed everything she had known this was coming, had known her father intended to say it, and whatever she felt about the situation was complicated enough that she hadn't been able to fully settle on a single expression to show him. She was scared. She had been scared before he arrived, Jackson realized, and not only because of the heat. Who knows you're on this road? Jackson asked. Anyone who wanted to know, Thomas said quietly. I wasn't hiding. I didn't think I needed to yet. A pause. I may have been wrong about the timing. Jackson was already thinking, already processing. 30 years of navigating complicated situations had given him a particular kind of operational mind, one that assessed threats and resources simultaneously and without panic. He looked up and down the highway in both directions. Empty. The desert was still. The heat was still pressing down like a hand. Nothing was visible. But invisible and absent were two different things, and Jackson Cole had learned that lesson decades ago on roads very different from this one. How many people know about the documentation? He asked. 3, Thomas said. Me, Emily, and the journalist. Where's the documentation now? Thomas looked at him steadily, made a decision in the car, in a waterproof bag under the spare tire. Jackson stood up slowly. He walked to the SUV and opened the back. He found the spare tire compartment, lifted the panel. There it was, a dark waterproof case, sealed, nondescript, sitting underneath everything like something that had been put there with care and intention. Didn't open it. He closed the compartment and came back. When the ambulance gets here, Jackson said, keeping his voice low and even, I'm going to follow you to the hospital, and we're going to figure out the next step together. He looked at both of them, at Thomas, at Emily. But I need you both to understand something right now. What? Emily asked. You're not alone in this anymore, Jackson said. Whatever this is. He looked at Thomas. You understand what I'm saying? Thomas Carter was a man who had spent 31 years of his life running toward the things most people ran away from. He had walked into burning buildings. He had carried strangers out of darkness. He knew what it meant when a person made a commitment, a real one, not a polite social gesture, but a genuine extension of their word, and he recognized one now. I understand, Thomas said. In the far distance, the sound of the ambulance siren began thin at first, barely distinguishable from the wind, getting closer. Jackson Cole stood at the side of that desert highway, one hand resting on the top of the disabled SUV, and felt something shift inside him that he hadn't felt in 22 months. He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The ambulance arrived 8 minutes later. The paramedics, two of them, efficient and focused, assessed Thomas quickly and confirmed what Jackson had already identified: heat exhaustion, advanced but not yet converted to the more dangerous heat stroke. Praised the shade structure. They asked who had set it up. Emily pointed to Jackson without hesitation. One of the paramedics, young, maybe 25, looked at Jackson Cole. Vest, at the patches, at the whole presentation of the man. He nodded once. Good work, he said. Professionally, sincerely. Jackson nodded back. They loaded Thomas onto the stretcher. Emily moved to climb into the back of the ambulance with her father, then stopped, turned back, looked at Jackson Cole standing there beside his motorcycle in the Arizona heat, a man who had pulled up as a stranger and stayed as something else entirely. Jackson, she said. Go be with your dad, he told her. You said you'd follow us. I'll be right behind you, he said. Promise. She looked at him for a moment longer, this man who had appeared out of nowhere when the world had narrowed down to heat and fear and a dying father and a silent phone. This man who was not what she had been afraid he was. This man who was something she didn't yet have the right word for. She climbed into the ambulance. Jackson Cole pulled on his helmet, swung onto his bike, waited for the ambulance to pull out. Then he followed it down the long, empty highway heading toward a hospital, toward whatever came next, carrying, in a waterproof case that was currently riding in the back of an SUV being towed behind them both, kind of information that made dangerous people desperate. He had stopped for two strangers in the desert. He had not fully understood yet what he had stopped into. He had made a promise. And Jackson Cole, for all the things the world thought it knew about him, for all the weight of every story that arrived before he did, was a man who kept his promises. Bike engine hummed beneath him. The desert road stretched out ahead. Somewhere behind them, invisible and patient as the heat itself, something else was moving too. The hospital in Payson was small, the kind of regional facility that handled what it could and airlifted what it couldn't. And by the time Jackson Cole walked through the emergency entrance, still wearing his vest, still carrying the load on him, staff at the front desk had already clocked him and made their calculations. He saw it happen. The slight straightening of posture, careful professional neutrality that dropped into place like a mask over something less neutral. He was used to it. He signed in as a visitor without being asked to explain himself, took a seat in the waiting area, and waited. That was what nobody understood about men like Jackson Cole. They assumed the vest meant impatience. They assumed the patches meant aggression. They did not assume that a man who looked like him would know how to sit in a hospital waiting room with his hands clasped between his knees and simply wait, without complaint, without making himself anyone's problem. But Jackson had learned patience the hard way through hospital waiting rooms of an entirely different kind. Rooms where the news at the end of the waiting was not always the news you had spent every minute praying for. He waited. Emily came out 23 minutes later. She looked steadier than she had in the desert. Her color was better. Someone had given her water and probably made her drink it slowly, and she had washed the dust off her face in whatever bathroom she'd found first. Her eyes still carried the particular weight of someone running on adrenaline that was starting to thin out. She stopped when she saw him. "You stayed," she said. "Said I would," Jackson replied. She sat down in the chair across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The waiting room had a television mounted in the corner, showing a weather segment, more heat, and then more heat after that. And a child 2 rows over was conducting a quiet but determined argument with a stuffed animal. Normal life happening all around them. "He's going to be okay," Emily said. "They want to keep him overnight for observation. His temperature is coming down." She exhaled a long, slow breath, the kind that takes an entire body's worth of held tension with it. "They said if he'd been out there another 30 minutes without intervention." She stopped, shook her head. "You know what they said." "Then we don't need to say it," Jackson told her. She looked at him. "No," she agreed, "we don't." Another silence. This one was different from the silences in the desert, less urgent, but more complicated. Kind of silence that exists between two people who have been through something together and are only now beginning to process the full shape of what that something was. "Can I ask you something else?" Emily said. "You can ask me anything," Jackson said. "I might not always have the answer, but you can ask." "What my father told you out there." She kept her voice low, steady, deliberately even. "About the evidence, about the company." She paused. "Does it change anything for you? Knowing what you know now?" Jackson considered the question seriously. The way she had come to understand in just a few hours that he considered everything with the full weight of his attention, without rushing to fill the silence with something easier than the truth. "No," he said finally. "It doesn't change anything." "Why not?" "Because the reason I stopped on that road had nothing to do with what came after it," he said. "I didn't stop because I knew there was going to be a story. Stop because a human being called for help." He looked at her directly. "What comes after that is just what comes after that. Stopping was the whole thing." Emily was quiet. Then she said very quietly, "I believe you." "Good," Jackson said. "Because I need you to understand something, Emily. Whatever your father got himself into, whatever he found, whoever is watching this is not something that stays simple. People who hide things don't give up what they're hiding because somebody found a document. They get creative. They get dangerous." He leaned forward slightly. "I need to know that you understand the weight of what you're carrying." Emily met his gaze without flinching, and he saw it again, that same quality he had registered in the desert when she had set her fear aside and done what needed to be done. The fiber of her, whatever she was made of underneath the terror of the afternoon. "I've understood the weight of it for 3 years," she said. "Since the day my father first showed me what he found." Jackson held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. "Okay," he said. "Then tell me everything," she told him. It took 45 minutes. She told him about the accident, a chemical fire at an industrial plant outside of Flagstaff 8 years ago, fire that the company had reported publicly as a contained equipment malfunction with no casualties. While the actual casualty list was buried, the records altered, the surviving witnesses quietly and systematically discouraged from speaking. 4 firefighters had died entering that plant without adequate information about the chemicals they were walking into. They had not been told what was burning. They had not been given the right protective equipment. They had gone in because that was what they did. They went in and they had not come out. Thomas Carter had not been on that call, but he had known all 4 of the men who were. He was supposed to be there, Emily said. Her voice was flat and careful around this particular fact, the way you spoke around something that still had edges sharp enough to cut. Traded shifts that week. Family thing, my grandmother was sick. Traded with one of the men who died. She paused. He has lived with that for 8 years. Not guilt, exactly. I mean, he knows logically that it wasn't his fault, but he has lived with it, you know? Yes, Jackson said. He knew exactly what she meant. He knew it from the inside. Started asking questions about 2 years after the accident. Quietly at first, just trying to understand what really happened in that plant that day, because the official report never made sense to any of the people who knew those men. Timeline was wrong. The chemical entry the company filed didn't match what the responding crews described. There were gaps. She folded her hands in her lap. The more he dug, the more he found. And the more he found, the more careful he became. Then, about 6 months ago, he found the internal communications. Emails? Jackson asked. Emails. Memos. A series of internal reports that show the company knew, 4 days before the fire, that there was a dangerous malfunction in the storage system. They knew. And they made a calculation: fix it quietly and expensively, or keep operating and hope nothing happened. She stopped. Something happened. The waiting room television droned in the background. Child with the stuffed animal had fallen asleep across 3 chairs. Everything around them was ordinary and calm, and beneath it, this story was moving like something underground. 4 men, Jackson said. 4 men, Emily confirmed, and their families, and every person who responded to that call and breathed those chemicals. Some of those people are still sick. Nobody is talking about it because the company made sure nobody was talking about it. Her jaw tightened. 8 years. And then my father walks into a journalist's office in Phoenix 2 weeks ago, and 4 days later, our car breaks down on an empty highway. You said the engine was fine, Jackson said. My father was a firefighter for 31 years, did his own mechanical maintenance. He checked everything before we left: Phoenix tires, fluid levels, engine, everything was fine. She looked at him steadily. He's not paranoid, Jackson. He's methodical. There's a difference. I know the difference, Jackson said. So you understand what I'm telling you. I understand exactly what you're telling me, he said. Question is, what does your father want to do about it? Emily opened her mouth to answer. And that was the exact moment that Thomas Carter appeared in the doorway of the waiting room, wearing a hospital gown, an IV line still taped to the inside of his left arm, and an expression on his face that suggested the nursing staff had very recently and unsuccessfully attempted to prevent him from getting out of bed. Dad, Emily said, standing immediately. You're supposed to be been lying in that bed for 20 minutes thinking about a conversation I need to have, Thomas said. Voice was stronger than it had been in the desert, not fully recovered, but coming back, filling out, getting its shape back. He looked at Jackson. And I figured if I was going to have it, I shouldn't make you wait for it. Jackson stood up. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, sit down before you fall down, Thomas. Thomas considered arguing, decided against it. He moved to a chair slowly, carefully, with the dignity of a man who was conceding the point without conceding the principle, and sat. Emily stood beside him. Jackson sat back down. The journalist, Thomas said without preamble. Her name is Sarah Okafor. She writes for a national outlet, serious investigative work, not tabloid stuff. She's been working this story independently for 2 years before I came to her. She had pieces of it. I had other pieces. He looked at Jackson steadily. Between what she had and what I brought her, we have enough. Enough to go to print. Enough to make it impossible to ignore. When? Jackson asked. She was planning 2 weeks out from my meeting with her, Thomas said, which means we're at 12 days. And in the meantime, Jackson said, someone may have tried to strand you in the desert. Possibly, Thomas said. He did not flinch from the word. Possibly. I'm not ready to say with certainty. But I have spent 31 years assessing risk. And right now my risk assessment is telling me that Emily and I should not be sleeping anywhere that someone who wants us quiet could predict we'd be sleeping. Jackson looked at him. Then he said something that surprised both of them, not because it was unexpected in nature, but because of how immediately and completely he meant it. You're staying with me tonight. Emily blinked. Jackson. Not a discussion, he said. You said your father needs to be kept overnight. That's here. That's fine. But tomorrow morning, when they discharge him, you're not going back to Phoenix. You're not going to whatever hotel you booked before all this happened. You're coming with me. You don't have to do this, Emily said. I'm aware of that, Jackson said. We're strangers to you, she said. This isn't your problem. This isn't your risk to take. Jackson looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his expression that was hard to read at first, steady, undemonstrative, the face of a man who had long ago stopped performing his feelings for external audiences. But underneath it, If you knew how to look, and Emily Carter was beginning to know how to look, there was something clear and decided and entirely genuine. My wife used to say something, Jackson told her. She said that the thing about choosing to care about people was that it didn't come with a boundary line. She said once you decided to be the kind of person who showed up for people, you didn't get to do it halfway. He paused. Spent 2 years after she died trying to live in a version of the world where I could care less. Didn't work. Another pause. Shorter. You're not strangers to me anymore. Stop being strangers somewhere around the time I knelt down in the desert and took your father's pulse. Thomas Carter was a man who did not cry easily. He was 58 years old and had attended more funerals than he cared to count and had held it together through all of them because there was always someone around him who needed the steadiness more than he needed the release. He did not cry now, but he did something with his jaw and his eyes that was in the same territory, a working, a tightening, a compression of something that had briefly expanded past the wall he kept around it. All right, Thomas said. His voice was rough. All right, Jackson. It was settled. What none of them knew, what none of them could have seen from inside that waiting room, was that in the parking lot of the Payson Regional Medical Center, a dark blue pickup truck had been sitting in the far corner for the last 40 minutes. The man inside it had made a phone call 11 minutes ago. The phone call had lasted less than 2 minutes. Since hanging up, he had not moved. Was watching the entrance. He was waitish. He was patient in the way that people are patient when they are being paid to be patient, and when the price of impatience is the loss of everything they have been paid for. Inside the hospital, Jackson called Emily to go back to her father's room and stay there. He would sort out where he was sleeping tonight and be back in the morning. Stood up to leave. Emily stopped him one more time. Jackson, she said, why does someone like you care so much about the truth? About what happened to 4 firefighters you never knew? Stopped. Turned back. Thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. When Carol was sick, he said finally there was a period of about 4 months where we kept getting information that turned out not to be true. Not lies, exactly. More like incomplete truths. Doctors who didn't want to give us the whole picture because they thought protecting us from the truth was a kindness. His voice was level, but something underneath it was working. It wasn't a kindness, it cost us time. Time we could have spent differently if we'd known. Time that we didn't get back. He looked at Emily steadily. I have a lot of feelings about people who decide that the truth belongs to them, to give out or withhold based on what's convenient for them. Your father spent 3 years trying to give 4 dead men their truth back. He met her gaze. That means something to me. Emily nodded slowly. Thank you, she said, for stopping, for staying. For she gestured a small helpless motion that encompassed too much to fit into words. Get some sleep, Jackson told her. Tomorrow's going to be a longer day than today. He walked out through the sliding doors. He did not notice the dark blue truck in the far corner. He did not notice the man inside it reaching for his phone again. Walked to his bike, pulled out his own phone, and did something he had not done in a very long time. Scrolled through his contacts to a name he had not dialed in months. Not because the friendship had cooled, it hadn't, but because he had been in a period of his life where reaching out felt like asking her for help, and asking for help felt like admitting that the armor had cracks in it, and admitting that felt like something he wasn't ready for. He was ready now. The phone rang twice. Jackson. The voice on the other end was deep and immediately alert, the voice of a man who had been awake for hours or was capable of sounding as though he had been the moment a call required it. Brother, it's been a while. It has, Jackson said. Dex, I need you. A pause. Brief, tell me where you are. Payson, Regional Hospital. I'll explain everything when you get here, but I need eyes, and I need bodies, and I need people I trust. Another pause, slightly longer. How many? Jackson thought about the waterproof case under the spare tire. He thought about the dark weight of what Thomas had described a corporation, 8 years of deliberate concealment, and the particular desperation of people who had hidden something large enough that they could not afford to have it found. Enough, he said. Bring enough, Dex. On my way, Dex said. 2 hours, Jackson hung up. Sat on his bike without starting it for a full minute, his hands resting on the grips, the evening air moving around him in the slow, warm way of Arizona nights. He was thinking about Carol. He was thinking about the way she used to look at him when he came home after a long ride, not with worry, never with recrimination, but with that particular quality of attention that meant she had been holding space for him while he was gone and was glad to have the space filled again. He was thinking about what she would say right now if she could see him. Thought she would say, "Good, this is what you're for." Started the bike. Inside the hospital, in room 14B, Thomas Carter was lying in a hospital bed with an IV in his arm and his daughter in the chair beside him. And he was thinking about four men he had known for years, men who had stood beside him at countless fires and shared countless meals and told him countless bad jokes and gone home to their families night after night, the way all of them did until one night they didn't. "Emily," he said, "I'm here, Dad. Are we doing the right thing?" The question was quiet, genuine. He was not a man who asked questions like this often. 3 years is a long time to carry something. And now that it's almost time to set it down, I keep thinking about what if setting it down causes more damage than carrying it did. Emily reached across and put her hand over his. "Four men," she said, "and their wives, and their kids, and every person who's been breathing the effects of that night for 8 years without knowing why." Thomas was quiet. "You taught me something a long time ago," Emily continued. "You said that in a burning building, you don't get to weigh the risk and walk away. You said that once you see someone who needs help, the calculation is already made for you." Thomas looked at his daughter. "Jackson stopped today," Emily said, "on an empty road in 110-degree heat. He didn't know us. He didn't know what he was stopping into. He just stopped." She squeezed her father's hand. "He can do that, then we can finish what you started." Thomas Carter closed his eyes. He breathed out slowly. The weight of the last 3 years pressed down and then lifted, fractionally not gone, not even close to gone, but redistributed somehow, shared. The way weight always becomes more bearable when there are more people carrying it. "Where is he now?" Thomas asked. "Jackson? He's getting help," Emily said. "Called someone." "What kind of someone?" Emily thought about the phone call she had overheard as Jackson walked out. She thought about his voice, calm, certain, asking for exactly what he needed without elaboration or apology. "The right kind," she said. In the parking lot, the dark blue truck had not moved, but 3 states away, on a phone call that had ended 8 minutes ago, a man in an expensive suit had opened his laptop, begun typing with the focused efficiency of someone initiating a process that had been designed in advance and simply needed to be activated. He was not panicking. Men like him did not panic, they planned. They had contingencies. They had people in right places who knew how to make problems disappear before they became the kind of problems that showed up in newspapers. He had handled situations like this before. He had handled them quietly and completely and without leaving evidence of the handling. He intended to handle this one the same way. What he did not know, what he could not have accounted for, because it was the one variable that had not existed in any previous version of a problem like this, was that the 2 people who were carrying the evidence he needed to contain had, through a single random act of roadside geography, fallen into the company of a man with 30 years of loyalty and a phone full of brothers who answered on the second ring. Did not know about Jackson Cole. He would. 2 hours and 14 minutes later, 3 motorcycles pulled into the parking lot of Payson Regional Medical Center. The riders who came off them were not young men. They were men in their 40s and 50s, men who had accumulated both mileage and judgment, men who wore their years the way Jackson wore his, visibly, without apology, and with a particular quality of stillness that only comes from having navigated enough situations that the ability to be still in hard moments has become second nature. Dex was the first one to reach Jackson. He was a big man, bigger than Jackson, with dark skin and a gray-streaked beard, and eyes that took in a situation with the rapid, comprehensive attention of someone who had learned long ago that missing details was expensive. He looked at Jackson. "You look like hell," Dex said. "Long day," Jackson said. "You said you needed help." Dex glanced at the hospital entrance. "It's about the family inside." "It's about what they're carrying," Jackson said. "About the people who want to take it from them before they can put it where it belongs." He looked at Dex steadily. "I need you to listen to me carefully, brother, because what I'm about to tell you is going to make you angry. I need you to stay calm until I'm finished." Dex studied him for a moment. "How angry?" Angry enough, Jackson said, he told him. When he finished, Dex stood very still for a long moment. Then he turned to the other two men who had ridden with him. Men Jackson knew well. Men who had been with him through things that lived in a different category from ordinary experience. And the look he gave them communicated something that didn't require words. Then he turned back to Jackson. "What do you need us to do?" he said. Jackson Cole, who had ridden out of his driveway that morning, simply trying to outrun his own silence, stood in a hospital parking lot under the Arizona stars and began to explain. The dark blue truck was still there, but it was no longer the most significant vehicle in that parking lot. The man inside it, watching 3 more motorcycles pull in, watching the men gather and speak with the intensity of people making a plan, felt for the first time in this particular operation something that was not quite certainty. He reached for his phone again. His call was answered on the first ring. "We have a problem," he said. On the other end, there was a pause. "Then how big?" The man in the truck looked at the motorcycles. The men, Jackson Cole standing in the center of them with his arms folded and his face unreadable, and something in his posture that communicated to anyone who knew how to read it that this man had made a decision and would not be moved from it. "Big enough," the man in the truck said. He was right. Just didn't know yet how right he was. The man in the dark blue truck made a mistake that night. It was not a dramatic mistake, not the kind that announced itself with noise or motion. It was the quiet kind, the kind that only reveals itself later when you trace the sequence of events backward and identify the precise moment when everything shifted. The mistake was simple. He stayed too long. Jackson had clocked the truck 20 minutes after Dex arrived, not because it was obviously suspicious. It was parked legally, engine off, unremarkable, but because Jackson Cole had developed over 30 years of navigating situations where the wrong kind of attention could end badly, particular sensitivity to things that did not move when they had no reason not to. Everything else in that parking lot had some logic to it. Cars coming and going, staff vehicles in designated spots. Truck had been there when he arrived, and it had not moved. The man behind the wheel had not gone inside. That combination, after 2 hours, stopped being coincidence and started being a fact that required a response. He said nothing to Dex about it immediately. He simply repositioned himself during their conversation, natural, unhurried, until he had an angle that let him watch the truck in his peripheral vision while appearing to look elsewhere. He waited. He gave it 20 more minutes. The truck didn't move. Jackson touched Dex's arm once, very briefly. Dex had known Jackson long enough to understand that gesture in its context. His eyes moved casually in the direction of nothing obvious. He absorbed the information. "Marcus," Dex said to one of the men who had ridden with him. He said it quietly and without any particular emphasis, the way you'd ask someone to pass something at the dinner table. "Take a walk, east end of the lot. Don't look at the blue truck." Marcus was 51 years old, had spent 8 years as a mechanic before he started riding, and had a gift for looking like he was doing nothing when he was doing something specific. He ambled, he stretched. He made his way to the east end of the lot in the way of a man whose joints were stiff from a long ride. Came back 3 minutes later. "Arizona plates," he said. "Rental sticker on the rear bumper. Driver's alone." Phone in his hand. "Watching the entrance?" Jackson asked. "Watching everything," Marcus said. The 4 men stood close together and spoke without looking at each other, the way men do when they have learned that the performance of a conversation matters as much as the conversation itself. "He calls someone the minute we move," Dex said. It wasn't a question. "He already called someone," Jackson said. "Twice in the last hour." He had watched the brief illumination of a phone screen through the windshield, watched the arm movement, tracked the timing. "Whatever he's reporting, we're in it." "So we have a tail," Marcus said. "We have a tail," Jackson confirmed. "The question is whether the tail is the problem or whether the tail is just the announcement of the problem." Nobody spoke for a moment. They were all thinking the same thing, which was that a rented truck with a single watcher was not, by itself, threat. Was information gathering. It was reconnaissance. Reconnaissance only mattered if something was going to act on it. "Can't stay here," Jackson said. "And we can't move like we're running." He thought for a second. "Dex, I need you to call Renata." Dex's eyebrows lifted. Just slightly. Renata Torres? She's a paralegal now, Jackson said. Works for a civil rights firm in Phoenix. She knows people, the kind of people who understand how evidence works and how to protect it. He paused. Thomas has a waterproof case in that towed SUV. It needs to be somewhere safer than the back of a disabled vehicle in a Payson impound lot. You want to move the evidence tonight, Dex said. I want to get the evidence out of a predictable location before whoever is sitting in that truck figures out it exists, Jackson said. Yes, Dex was already pulling out his phone. Jackson went back inside. The hospital at night carried a different quality than it did during the day, quieter, slower, the lighting slightly lower in the common areas, the staff moving with the careful efficiency, people managing an extended shift. Jackson walked through it without hurrying. He found room 14B and knocked twice, lightly, before pushing the door open. Thomas was awake. Emily was asleep in the chair beside him, genuinely asleep, boneless, absolute sleep of someone whose body had finally called in its debts. And Thomas was sitting up in bed, looking at the wall opposite with the expression of a man conducting a very serious internal conversation. He looked at Jackson when the door opened. Jackson held up a hand, quiet. He moved to the chair on the other side of the bed, sat down, and leaned in close enough to speak without raising his voice. There's a man in the parking lot who has been there for over 2 hours, Jackson said. Rental truck. Alone. He's been on his phone twice that I clocked. Thomas was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. They found us that fast. They may have known where you were going before you got there, Jackson said. Did you use a credit card anywhere today? Book the hospital visit through insurance? Anything that goes into a database with your name on it? Thomas's jaw tightened. We stopped for gas in Mesa. I used my card. That's enough, Jackson said. If someone is running active surveillance on you, and I think they are a credit card transaction in Mesa at 10 a.m. tells them your route, they would have had people in position before you even left the city. Thomas absorbed this. His expression did not panic, it resolved. Clarified. The face of a man who had just been given information that confirmed a theory he had been hoping was wrong, who had now, with that confirmation, no more energy to spend on hoping, only on deciding. The documentation, Thomas said immediately. That's why I'm here, Jackson said. The SUV is in the Payson impound lot, which is a public facility with a known address. I need to know exactly where in that vehicle the case is and whether there's anything else I need to pull from it. Waterproof case under the spare tire, Thomas said. Black. Lock combination is Carol. Carol. I used your wife's name because I knew if I ever needed someone to open it, it should be someone worth trusting. He paused. Did that 6 months ago, before I ever imagined meeting you. Jackson was very still for a moment. The air in that room felt briefly heavier, like something had shifted in the pressure of it. I'll get it, Jackson said. Voice was controlled, but something behind it was not entirely controllable. And Thomas heard that something and understood it completely and said nothing about it, because some things were too significant for words and too private for commentary. Jackson, Thomas said. There's something else in the case. Second envelope, inside the main folder, sealed, addressed to Sarah Okafor. He held Jackson's gaze. Something happens to me before this goes to print, that goes to her. No matter what, you understand. Nothing is going to happen to you, Jackson said. That's not what I asked you, Thomas said. Quietly but precisely. I asked if you understood. Jackson looked at the older man, the exhaustion in his face and the resolve underneath it. The particular dignity of someone who had been carrying something heavy for 3 years and was not going to let the nearness of the finish line make him careless about contingencies. I understand, Jackson said. If something happens to you, that envelope goes to Sarah Okafor. Thank you, Thomas said. Jackson stood to go. One more thing, Thomas said. Jackson paused. My daughter. He looked at Emily sleeping in the chair, the same look. Jackson imagined he had given her since she was an infant, the look of someone whose love had grown large enough that it lived permanently outside his body. She doesn't know everything yet about what's in that envelope, about how deep this goes. A pause. She knows enough to be in danger. She doesn't know enough to be fully prepared for what's coming. What is coming, Thomas? Jackson asked. Thomas looked at him. When this goes public, he said, it won't just be 4 dead firefighters and 1 corporation. There are 3 other companies connected to the same chemical supplier. There are inspectors who signed off on safety reports they never actually conducted. There are 2 county officials who received payments to look the other way. He paused. This is not a small story. This is a story that is going to pull a thread and unravel something that a lot of people with a great deal of money and influence have spent 8 years keeping intact. He looked at Jackson steadily. I need my daughter to be safe. Whatever else happens, the documentation, the journalist, the people in the parking lot, Emily is first. I already told you, Jackson said. She's first. She's always been first since the moment I pulled up on that highway. Thomas Carter let out a breath. Long, slow. Get some sleep, Jackson told him, with the same firmness Thomas had once used with his own crew. We move in the morning. He went back out into the corridor, stood there for a moment, alone in the quiet of the hallway, with the weight of what Thomas had just told him settling across his shoulders. 3 other companies, paid inspectors, county officials. He had walked into a family-free rescue on a desert highway and out the other side of it, holding a thread that if Thomas was right, connected to one of the larger and more deliberate conspiracies of corruption he's ever heard described to him in plain language. Thought about Carol. He thought about what she would say about this specific moment, standing in a hospital hallway at 11 at night, holding a thread he had not gone looking for, wondering whether pulling it was his job to do. He already knew what she would say. He pulled out his phone and called Dex. Renata, he asked, 40 minutes out, Dex said. She's bringing a colleague. I need someone at the impound lot first, Jackson said. Tonight. The case needs to move before morning, a pause. Then Marcus can do it. You have the combination? I do. Tell him it's under the spare tire in the SUV that came in tonight. Black waterproof case. And Dex, he stopped. Dex said, tell him to be invisible getting in and out. He's always invisible, Dex said. Jackson hung up. He walked back to the entrance, back out through the sliding doors, back into the parking lot. Truck was still there. He didn't look at it. He walked to his bike and sat without starting it and took a slow breath of night air and thought about the next 12 hours the way he had once thought about particularly complicated rides, not as a single overwhelming distance, but as a series of manageable segments, each one leading to the next. He was thinking so specifically about the next 12 hours that he almost missed the moment when the truck's engine started. Almost. He heard it, the quiet ignition of an engine that had been off long enough that the warm-up was slight, distinctive, and he turned his head without moving the rest of his body, using only his peripheral vision, watching the truck pull out of its parking spot slowly and drive toward the exit. Going. Not toward him. Not toward anyone, just leaving. That was wrong. People who were watching something did not leave when the thing they were watching was still there and had not changed status. They left when they had been given new instructions. They left when information they gathered had been transmitted and acted upon, and the next phase of the plan had been activated elsewhere. Jackson was off his bike in 2 seconds, walking fast. For Dex, the truck just left, he said, which means something changed, which means the call he made 20 minutes ago was not another status update. It was a handoff. Dex looked at him. Handoff to who? Someone who doesn't need to sit in a parking lot, Jackson said. Someone who acts. A beat of hard silence. Marcus is at the impound lot, Dex said. Jackson was already dialing Marcus's number. Marcus picked up on the first ring. I'm here, he said. Lot's quiet. I can see the SUV from the perimeter. You see anybody else? Jackson asked. A pause. The particular pause of someone looking carefully. No. But there's a car parked on the street outside the lot entrance. Engine off. Nobody visible inside, but it's running. I can see the exhaust. Jackson's jaw tightened. How long? Just pulled up, Marcus said. 2 minutes ago, maybe. Get the case and get out, Jackson said. Don't run. Don't rush. But do not take longer than you need to. Stood, Marcus said. Give me 8 minutes. 8 minutes. Jackson stood in the parking lot and counted time the way you count it when there is nothing useful you can do with your hands and everything useful is happening somewhere else. Dex stood beside him. Neither of them spoke. The night was warm and very quiet, and across the city somewhere Marcus was moving through a parking lot toward a waterproof case that 8 years of a dead man's justice lived inside. And on the street outside that lot, a car sat with its engine running. Minute 4, Marcus's voice came back through the phone. I have it. Jackson exhaled. The car on the street moved, Marcus said. I came out of the lot. It drove past slow. Past you? Past the entrance. Then it turned the corner. A pause. Don't think they saw me come out. I don't think they were watching the lot yet. Think I was maybe 90 seconds ahead of them. 90 seconds. Go, Jackson said. Come directly back here. He hung up. Close, Dex said. He had been close enough to the phone to hear most of it. Too close, Jackson agreed. What happened next happened fast. Not the explosive, chaotic fast of action movies, the real fast, the kind that happens in small, critical increments when multiple situations converge, and the margin for error becomes suddenly and absolutely zero. Marcus arrived back at the hospital 12 minutes later with the waterproof case under his jacket, and 4 minutes after that, a car pulled into the hospital parking lot that had not been there before. Not the truck, a different vehicle. Dark sedan. It moved through the lot slowly, the way vehicles move when they are looking for something specific. Jackson watched it from 30 feet away without looking at it. Renata, Dex said quietly. His phone had buzzed. She's 2 minutes out. When she gets here, Jackson said, still watching the sedan with his peripheral vision, do not bring the case to her in this parking lot. We take her around back, through the loading entrance, inside. You think they're watching the front? I think they're smart enough to watch the front, Jackson said. The sedan completed one slow circuit of the lot and parked. Nobody got out. Renata Torres arrived 2 minutes later in a gray car with a colleague in the passenger seat, a quiet, precise woman named Donna who worked in document security and who said very little but did everything with the focused economy of someone who had never wasted emotion in her professional life. They went in through the loading entrance, as Jackson had said. They went to a staff conference room that Dex had secured with a charm offensive aimed at a night nurse who had taken one look at him and decided that accommodating this particular request was worth a small deviation from protocol. Jackson laid the case on the table. He entered the combination CAROL and the lock released. The case was exactly what Thomas had described. Main folder, thick with documents, printed emails, memos, chemical reports, internal communications bearing dates and signatures, and the careful, deliberate specificity of real evidence as opposed to constructed evidence. Inside the main folder, a sealed envelope with Sarah Okafor's name written on it in Thomas's careful handwriting. Renata touched nothing without gloves. She examined what was in front of her with the precise eye attention of someone who understood the difference between evidence that survived legal scrutiny and evidence that didn't. And within 10 minutes, she had told Jackson 3 things. Documents were genuine, they were comprehensive, and they needed to be copied and secured in at least 2 separate locations before morning. I can handle that, Donna said. It was the most she had said since arriving. Tonight, Jackson asked. Before 3 a.m., Donna said. I know a notary and a document security facility on the east side of Phoenix. Digital copies encrypted and backed up in 2 cloud locations before sunrise. Jackson looked at Renata. She's good, Renata said simply. Do it, Jackson said. He took the sealed envelope addressed to Sarah Okafor and held it for a moment. It was heavier than it looked, the way things always were when they contained more than paper. Thought about Thomas lying in room 14B with one hand on his daughter's arm and 31 years of firefighting behind him and 4 men who deserved better than what they'd gotten from the world. Put the envelope in his inside vest pocket, against his chest, next to the place Carol used to rest her head when she hugged him. He would keep it there until it was time. Back in the parking lot at 1:17 in the morning, the sedan was still sitting where it had parked. Still nobody visible inside, still watching. Jackson walked past it on his way to his bike and resisted every instinct that told him to stop and knock on the window and have a very direct conversation with whoever was inside it, because that instinct, while entirely understandable, was not the right move. The right move was to let them watch an empty parking lot while the thing they were trying to contain was already somewhere else. Texted Dex, cases with Renata, moving to secondary location. Clean. Dex texted back 30 seconds later, good. We have a problem. Jackson stared at the phone. Then what problem? Dex, check your news. He pulled up the news on his phone. He searched Thomas Carter's name. He searched Sarah Okafor's name. He searched Flagstaff chemical fire, and he searched Meridian Industrial, which was the name Thomas had given him, as the primary company. And for a moment, none of the searches returned anything alarming. Then he searched a slightly different combination, and the result that came back stopped his hand on the screen. The headline was 3 hours old. It was a story about a journalist named Sarah Okafor, who had been placed on emergency administrative leave by her employer, pending an internal review of sourcing practices on an unspecified ongoing story. Story quoted an anonymous senior editor who said the review was routine. Quoted no one else. Sarah Okafor had been neutralized, not physically, legally, professionally. Kind of neutralization that didn't leave marks and didn't require violence and was almost impossible to fight in the short term because it operated through institutional channels that took weeks or months to challenge, even when you had the standing to challenge them. Jackson sat on his bike in the parking lot and felt the story he thought he understood rearrange itself around him. They had not gone after the evidence. They had gone after the mechanism by which the evidence could become public. They had moved against the journalist before. The journalist could move against them. They had done it tonight, which meant they had known about Sarah Okafor before the truck showed up in the parking lot, which meant their intelligence was either very good or Thomas had been less careful than he thought in the weeks before reaching out to her. He called Dex. "I see it," Dex said before Jackson could speak. "They shut down the journalist," Jackson said. "They tried to shut down the journalist." Dex said, "There's a difference." "Is there?" "She's on leave. She can't publish." "She can't publish at her current outlet," Dex said. "There are other outlets. There are other journalists. There is also paused. The internet exists, Jackson. Documentation exists. What they've done is remove one path. They haven't removed the destination." Jackson breathed. Dex was right. Dex was almost always right in situations that required clear thinking from someone who wasn't personally entangled in them. "We need to tell Thomas," Jackson said, "in the morning." Dex said, "Let him sleep. He needs strength for tomorrow more than he needs information tonight." "Emily?" Silence for a moment. "Emily," Dex said carefully, "is going to take this hard. She needs to hear it from you." "Why me?" "Because she trusts you," Dex said. "She's known you for 8 hours, and she trusts you more than people who've known her for years. And you know why that is." Jackson did know why. He didn't say it. "Get some sleep," Dex said. "I've got the parking lot covered tonight. Marcus and I will rotate. Nothing is coming in or out of that hospital that we don't know about." "Dex." Jackson started. "I went out this morning to clear my head." "I know," Dex said. "I wasn't looking for this." "I know that too," Dex said. "Here it is." A pause. Very brief. "Carol would say this is exactly how the right things find the right people." Call ended. Jackson sat in the parking lot under the Arizona and the stars, with a sealed envelope against his chest and the weight of everything he had learned in the last 12 hours distributed across him, in the way that only real weight distributes, not evenly, not comfortably, but completely, the way a thing settles into you when you have accepted that you are the person who is going to carry it. Thought about 12 days. 12 days till Thomas's original publication timeline. One journalist now administratively silenced. A corporation with 8 years of practice at making inconvenient things disappear. A parking lot with a dark sedan that was still watching, even though the thing it had been sent to find was currently being digitally secured in a facility on the east side of Phoenix. Thought about 4 dead men. He thought about the families of 4 dead men. Thought about the way Thomas had said their names, not loudly, not dramatically, but with that particular weight that comes from carrying specific human beings inside your memory for years. They had been real. They had laughed at bad jokes and gone home to their kids and had no idea. When they pulled on their gear and went into that building, the people responsible for keeping them safe had made a calculation and decided that keeping them safe was too expensive. Phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Then something made him answer.
"Is this Jackson Cole?"
The voice was a woman's, controlled, professional, but underneath the control there was something taut and urgent. "My name is Sarah Okafor." Jackson was very still. "You get this number." "Thomas Carter gave it to me 3 days ago," she said. "He said if anything happened that disrupted our original plan, I should call you." A pause. "Something has happened." "I know," Jackson said. "I just read it." "Then you know they've put me on leave." Her voice was steady, but the steadiness was work. They claimed sourcing concerns. It's not about sourcing. It's about the story. Someone called my editor at 11 o'clock tonight after hours, which tells you how urgent this was to them, and made representations about the material I was working with that are false, but that are false in ways that are very difficult to disprove quickly. She stopped, took a breath. But here's what they don't know, Mr. Cole. They think they've shut me down. They think administrative leave means the story dies. Doesn't it? Jackson asked. I have a colleague, she said. Different outlet. We went to journalism school together. She's been aware of this story in broad outline for the last 2 weeks, as a contingency, because Thomas and I both understood that I might become a target. Another pause. I can get the documentation to her original documents verifiable with chain of custody she can publish independently within 48 hours. Her outlet is smaller than mine, but it's credible. And once it's out, the bigger outlets will have to follow. 48 hours, Jackson repeated. From the moment she receives the documents, Sarah said. So the question is whether you can get them to her. Jackson's hand moved without quite thinking about it to his chest, to the pocket where the sealed envelope rested. Thought about the waterproof case that Donna was currently digitizing in a Phoenix facility. Thought about 12 days that had just become 48 hours. Where's your colleague? He asked. Tucson, Sarah said. He almost smiled. He had a complicated history with Tucson. He had made a promise outside a gas station in Tucson, and that promise had led him to be the kind of man who stopped on empty desert highways when he heard someone call for help. She be ready to receive the documents tomorrow? He asked. She's ready right now, Sarah said. She's been ready for 2 weeks. Then we'll be there tomorrow, Jackson said. Before noon. He heard Sarah exhale a long, unsteady release that she had clearly been holding for a while. Mr. Cole, she said, Thomas told me about you. He told me what you did on that highway today. He exaggerated, Jackson said automatically. He didn't, she said. He told me that a man in a Hell's Angels vest pulled over in 110-degree heat and saved his life, and then agreed to protect him and his daughter without knowing the full story simply because it was the right thing to do. She paused. I've been in investigative journalism for 15 years. I have met a lot of people who say they care about the truth. I have met very few who demonstrate it at personal cost. Another pause. You are demonstrating it. Jackson was quiet for a moment. These 4 men, he said, tell me their names. Sarah was silent for a second, not from reluctance, but from the particular preparation of someone who was about to say something that mattered. Daniel Torres, she said. Kevin McAllister. Robert Jennings. James Wu. Jackson repeated them silently. Held them. Get some rest, he told Sarah. Tomorrow we finish this. He hung up. He sat on his bike for another minute. Round him, the parking lot was quiet. Dex was somewhere in the shadows, being invisible, which he was very good at. The sedan was still parked across the lot, watching an outcome that had already moved past it. Tomorrow, Tucson, 100 miles south. The documentation already secured and reproducible. Journalist ready to receive it. 12 days of original timeline collapsed into 48 hours. Because the people trying to stop this story had pushed it instead of slowed it, the way pressure always makes something move faster when it has nowhere left to compress. Jackson Cole had not planned any of this. He had planned a ride through Arizona alone, with the engine loud enough to drown out his own thoughts. Instead, he was sitting in a hospital parking lot with 4 dead men's names in his chest, alongside a sealed envelope. 11 Hell's Angels brothers either here or en route. Retired firefighter in room 14B who had spent 3 years carrying something too heavy for one person, and a young woman asleep in a hospital chair who didn't yet know that the story her father had been building had just accelerated beyond anyone's original plan. He had one more call to make. He dialed a number he knew by heart, rang 4 times. Then this is Brother Raymond. It's 2 in the morning. I know it is, Jackson said. I need you in Payson by 7. And I need you to make 4 calls after this one. Tell them to bring their bikes and plan for a long ride. Pause. How long? Long enough to matter, Jackson said. Brother Raymond did not ask for more information. This was one of the things Jackson had always valued about the men he had spent his life alongside. When the signal was clear, they didn't need the full picture to make the decision. They had decided years ago what kind of men they were going to be. The individual situations were just applications of a commitment already made. 7 a.m., Raymond said. We'll be there. Jackson finally started his bike. The engine turned over with that particular sound that had accompanied every significant moment of his adult life, the low, purposeful rumble of something built for distance. Pulled out of the parking lot and pointed himself toward the motel 2 miles up the road where he would sleep for 4 hours and wake up and ride toward whatever came next. The sedan across the lot remained parked. The two men inside it watched the motorcycle leave and then looked at each other. And then one of them reached for his phone and dialed. He's moving, he said. On the other end, there was a pause. Let him go. We'll pick him up in the morning. And the family? Still inside. We have the building covered. Another pause. Longer this time. Are we sure about the documentation? The voice asked. It's still in the vehicle? We have eyes on the impound lot. The car hasn't been touched. The voice on the end of the line was quiet for a moment. Keep watching, it said, and increase the coverage. I want 2 more people at that hospital before sunrise. Call ended. Across the city in a secure document facility, Donna was finishing the last of the digital copies with the focused precision she brought to everything. The originals were in a fireproof case. The digitals were backed up in 3 separate encrypted locations. Chain of custody was documented and time-stamped and legally defensible. The thing that a corporation had spent 8 years trying to bury was now in 5 places simultaneously. By morning, it would be in 6. By noon tomorrow, if everything held, if the next 12 hours went the way Jackson intended them to go, it would be in the hands of a journalist in Tucson who would spend 48 hours making it impossible to ignore, impossible to suppress, and impossible to take back. Daniel Torres, Kevin McAllister, Robert Jennings, James Wu. 4 names. 4 men who had walked into a building they should never have been sent into unprepared and never walked out. 8 years was a long time to wait for the truth, but the truth was moving now, and it had the right people carrying it. Jackson was back at the hospital by 6:45 in the morning. He had slept 3 hours and 50 minutes, not enough, but enough. He had learned from Carol's illness the body could sustain almost anything if the purpose was clear enough, and his purpose this morning was as clear as anything he had ever pointed himself toward. He found Emily in the corridor outside her father's room, holding a paper cup of coffee with both hands, the way people hold things when their hands need something to do. She had changed clothes. Someone had brought her a bag from the car overnight, he assumed, and she looked like a person who had also slept a few hours and was running on the same combination of purpose and caffeine that he was. She looked up when she heard him coming. He's better, she said immediately. Doctor came at 6. His temperature is fully normalized. They're going to discharge him at 8. Good, Jackson said. We need to talk before he comes out. Emily studied his face. She was getting better at reading it faster than most people did, which told him something about her. Something happened last night, she said. It wasn't a question. Sit down, he said. They sat in 2 chairs against the corridor wall, and Jackson told her about the truck, about Marcus, and the impound lot and the 90-second margin. Told her about the documentation being secured overnight, about the digital copies, about Donna and the encrypted backups. Told her all of that. First, the part that was stable, the part that had gone right, because he had learned that the right way to deliver hard news was to establish the ground under someone's feet before you told them the ground had shifted. Then he told her about Sarah Okafor. Emily was very still while he talked. She held the coffee cup. Face went through several things in the space of a few minutes, a tightening first, then something that looked like it might become anger, then something colder and more determined than anger, expression of a person who has moved past the emotional response and arrived directly at the tactical one. He silenced her, Emily said when he finished. They tried to, Jackson said. There's a difference. She looked at him. You talked to her last night. She called me. You talked to Sarah Okafor last night, and you didn't wake us up to tell us. Her voice had an edge to it. Not anger at him, he could hear the distinction. Anger at the situation, redirected for a moment onto the nearest available surface. You needed sleep more than you needed that information. At 2 in the morning, Jackson said, I made a call. If it was the wrong call, tell me. Beat of silence. Then it wasn't the wrong call. She exhaled. What's the plan? Tucson, Jackson said. Sarah's colleague is there. She has the story in outline. She's been waiting 2 weeks for the documents. We get the originals and the digitals to her today, before noon, and she publishes within 48 hours. Emily absorbed this. 48 hours, she said. My father waited 3 years. And now it comes down to 48 hours. It comes down to the next 4, Jackson said. Getting from here to Tucson without losing what we're carrying. People in the parking lot, she said. They think the documentation is still in the impound lot, Jackson said. That's our window. Once they figure out it's moved, the window closes. So we move before they figure it out. Emily was nodding, not the nod of someone passively receiving information, but the nod of someone actively integrating it, building the next step while the current step was still being described. He recognized it. He respected it. My father is not going to stay behind, she said. Don't suggest it. Don't let him think it's an option. He will walk out of this hospital and onto whatever is moving, and there is nothing either of us can do about that, so we should plan around it. I already planned around it, Jackson said. He rides with me. Emily looked at him. Something moved across her face, complicated, compressed, the look of a person processing too many things at once and managing to hold all of them without dropping any. You're going to put my 60-year-old father, who was in heat exhaustion yesterday, on the back of a motorcycle. I'm going to put your father, who is a 60-year-old former firefighter with 31 years of running toward fires, on the back of my motorcycle. Jackson said, there's a difference. She almost smiled. Almost. He's going to love that, she said. And then the almost smile dissolved back into something more serious. Jackson, what if it's not enough? Even if we get to Tucson, even if Sarah's colleague publishes, what if the company just denies everything? What if they have lawyers that make it disappear again? Jackson was quiet for a moment. Then he said, when I was 23 years old, I thought the way to make something disappear was to be loud enough to drown it out. Thought the way to protect something was to be bigger than whatever was threatening it. He paused. I was right about that in some situations, but I was wrong about what the actual protection was. He looked at her steadily. The protection is that the truth is out. That's it. That's the whole thing. Once it's out, once it's published, once it exists in the world, in a form that can't be unprinted, everything they do after that is just evidence. Every lawyer they send, every denial they issue, every attempt they make to suppress it becomes part of the story instead of a wall around it. Emily held his gaze. Your father understood that 3 years ago, Jackson said. That's why he built what he built, not just one piece of evidence, but a whole architecture of it, documented and cross-referenced and preserved. He didn't do that by accident. He did that because he knew that the truth by itself isn't enough. Truth has to be undeniable. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, he's going to want to talk to you before we leave. I know, Jackson said. I'll go in. Thomas was sitting up in bed, fully alert, his color back to something that resembled his actual color rather than the ashen gray of the day before. The IV was out. He was dressed in street clothes, the same clothes from yesterday, slightly rumpled, which seemed entirely appropriate for a man who had spent the night in a hospital bed. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who had been through what he was and had come out the other side with the stubborn vitality of someone who was not finished yet. He looked at Jackson the moment he walked through the door. You talked to Sarah, Thomas said. Last night, Jackson confirmed. She called me. You gave her my number. I gave it to her 3 days ago, Thomas said. Told her if anything happened to me or the original plan, she should call you. He paused. Didn't know you yet when I gave it to her. I just knew Carol's name was the combination on the case, and I figured anyone Carol belonged to was worth calling. Jackson sat down. He looked at Thomas at the worn, particular dignity of the man and felt again what he had felt at various points in the last 18 hours, the sense that this meeting, specific confluence of people on a specific highway on a specific afternoon, had not been arbitrary, did not fully believe in fate. He believed in choices. But he was willing to acknowledge that sometimes choices made by people who were paying attention created patterns that looked, from the outside, like something more intentional than coincidence. She told me the names, Jackson said. Thomas looked at him. Daniel Torres, Kevin McAllister, Robert Jennings, James Wu, Jackson said. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were steady and clear, but the clarity was the effortful kind. Good men, he said. Daniel had 2 daughters. Kevin was getting married the following spring. Robert had just made lieutenant. He stopped. James Wu used to bring food to every shift, insisted on cooking for the whole crew. Terrible cook. We ate everything he made because that's what you do. Tell me about them on the road, Jackson said gently. We need to move. But I want to hear about them. On the way to Tucson, Thomas looked up sharply. Tucson, Sarah's colleague. She publishes within 48 hours of receiving the documents. Jackson held his gaze. It ends today, Thomas. Everything you built over 3 years, it goes where it needs to go today. Thomas Carter was quiet for 10 seconds. Jackson counted them. Watched the older man hold the weight of 3 years of careful, solitary, costly labor, and then set it down. Not drop it. Set it down deliberately, the way you set something down when you have carried it to the right place. Let's go, Thomas said. Outside the hospital, at 7:58 in the morning, Brother Raymond and 4 other men were parked in a line that made every person coming through the entrance stop and look twice. 7 motorcycles total, including Jackson's and Dex's. 7 men in leather and patches, and the accumulated presence of people who had decided, without announcement or fanfare, that this was where they were supposed to be this morning. Emily came through the doors first, walking beside her father, who was moving carefully but moving under his own power, and she stopped when she saw them. All of them, lined up in the morning light, engines quiet, waiting. Jackson, she said. You said your father wouldn't stay behind. Jackson said, coming up beside her. I made sure he doesn't have to. Thomas Carter stood on the hospital sidewalk and looked at 7 men who had driven through the night or risen before dawn to be here. Men who did not know him and owed him nothing. Something happened in his face that he would have been embarrassed to describe and that everyone watching understood completely. Don't know what to say, Thomas said. Don't say anything, Dex told him from his bike. Just get on. Thomas looked at Jackson. Jackson tilted his head toward the back of his motorcycle. Thomas walked over. He stood beside it for a moment, a 60-year-old man who had spent his life running toward danger and who had for 3 years been running toward this particular truth. And then he swung onto the back of Jackson Cole's bike with a steadiness that made Emily exhale with something that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, but lived in the complicated territory between them. Emily rode in a car with Renata Torres, who had stayed through the night and was driving to Tucson herself. Donna was already there, having driven through the dark hours with the original documents secured in her passenger seat. Convoy moved out at 8:15, 7 motorcycles and 1 gray car, heading south on Highway 87, the same highway where everything had begun less than 24 hours earlier. The morning was already warm, the kind of warm that promised another brutal afternoon. The desert on either side, doing what the desert always did, enduring, unhurried, different to the urgency of human schedules. Thomas said nothing for the first 20 minutes. Jackson could feel him behind him, the particular weight and stillness of a man who was in his thoughts so completely that the physical world had temporarily lost priority. He did not interrupt it. He had learned from Carol that some kinds of processing required silence the way healing required time, and that the kindest thing you could do was provide the condition and get out of the way. Then Thomas said, over the wind, I owe you something I don't know how to pay back. You don't owe me anything, Jackson said. I do, Thomas said, not just the stopping, not just the hospital, or last night or this. He gestured slightly, meaning the convoy around them. I owe you the fact that I'm going to be able to finish this. 3 years, Jackson. 3 years of carrying it alone because I didn't know who I could trust and I couldn't risk Emily any more than necessary, and I kept thinking I would right moment, the right person, the right. He stopped. And then a man on a motorcycle pulled over on an empty highway in 110-degree heat, and he was the right person. He was the whole answer. Jackson was quiet for a moment. The road ran ahead of them. Carol would have liked you, he said finally. She always said she could tell a person's character by whether they showed up when showing up was inconvenient. He paused. You showed up every day for 3 years. That's not nothing, Thomas. It's everything. Sasford. Behind them, in the gray car, Emily sat with Renata and said almost nothing for the first hour. because she was watching the motorcycles through the windshield and feeling something she did not immediately have language for. It came to her slowly over the course of the first 50 miles. She was feeling was the specific, disorienting, recalibrating experience of having your understanding of the world adjusted at the level of foundation rather than detail. She had been afraid of the man who stopped on the highway. She had looked at the leather and the patches and the reputation and assembled a picture that had nothing to do with the person inside it. And he had dismantled that picture not by arguing against it, but by simply being consistently and without performance exactly who he actually was. She thought about the people who had been afraid to stop, cars that had passed the disabled SUV on Highway 87 and kept going. She thought about the calculation people made when they decided that involvement was too costly, that strangers were too risky, that the world was too complicated to simply pull over and help. She understood that calculation. She had made versions of it herself. She understood now, with the particular clarity that comes from having been on the other side of it, from having been the person on the ground calling for help while the cars drove past exactly what that calculation cost. Cost everything. It cost Daniel Torres's daughters having a father, cost Kevin McAllister's wedding. It cost Robert Jennings his lieutenant's career, cost James Wu the chance to keep cooking terrible food for people who loved him enough to eat it anyway. She wiped her eyes. Renata, who was driving and watching the road, and had the grace of someone who understood when a silence was not empty, said nothing. They arrived in Tucson at 11:43 in the morning. Sarah Okafor's colleague was a woman named Diana Chen, and she met them at the door of her apartment building with the focused, slightly feverish energy of a journalist who had been waiting for a story for 2 weeks and was about to receive it. She was younger than Jackson had imagined, early 30s, sharp-eyed, kind of person who processed information the way musicians process sound, taking it in at a level below conscious thought and returning it transformed. She shook Jackson's hand first. She looked at the vest. She did not flinch. "You're the one who stopped," she said. "I stopped," Jackson confirmed. "Good," she said simply. "Come inside." What happened in the next 2 hours was documentation in the most literal sense. Diana receiving the originals, reviewing the chain of custody records Donna had prepared, cross-referencing the digital copies against the physical papers with the methodical intensity of someone building something that would need to survive legal scrutiny, journalistic scrutiny, and the particular scrutiny of an institution that had spent 8 years crafting its own alternative narrative. Thomas sat across the table from her and answered every question she asked. He was precise and detailed and patient in a way that Jackson recognized as the discipline of a man who had rehearsed this testimony in his own mind so many times that the delivery had become natural. Emily sat beside him. She did not speak much. She held her father's hand. When the account reached the part about Daniel Torres's daughters, Thomas's voice caught just once and then steadied. He kept going. Diana Chen looked up from her notes at one point and looked at Jackson Cole, standing against the wall of her apartment in his vest with his arms crossed and his face in its default expression of attentive calm. "Off the record," she said to him, "how did you get involved in this?" "I heard someone call for help," Jackson said. She looked at him for a moment. "That's the whole story?" "That's the whole story," he said. She nodded slowly. Then she went back to her notes. 2:37 in the afternoon, Diana Chen looked up from the last page of the last document and said, "I have everything I need. I'll have a draft to my editor by tonight. We publish in 48 hours." The room was quiet for a moment. Thomas Carter put both hands flat on the table, the way a man does when he needs the ground under him to be solid. He looked at his hands. Then he looked up at Jackson. 48 hours, he said. His voice was rough. 48 hours, Jackson confirmed. Emily made a sound, small, compressed. The sound of 3 years of fear and vigilance and love and determination finally finding the edge it had been looking for. Thomas reached across and pulled her into him. She let him. They stayed like that for a long moment while the room held its breath around them, and outside, in the afternoon heat, 7 motorcycles sat in a line in the parking lot, waiting the way they had been waiting all along, not for thanks, not for recognition, just for the thing to be finished the right way. Jackson stepped out quietly. He stood in the warmth of the Tucson afternoon with his hand in his inside vest pocket, feeling the sealed envelope against his palm. Pulled it out, looked at Sarah Okafor's name in Thomas's handwriting. He went back inside. Diana, he said. She looked up. There's one more thing. He laid the envelope on the table. Thomas prepared this as a contingency, he said. Everything that's already in the documentation plus the names of the 2 county officials and the inspectors who signed the false reports. He looked at Diana steadily. He said it was for Sarah. But Sarah would want you to have it. Diana Chen picked up the envelope with both hands. She held it carefully, the way you held things that had been carried a long distance. I'll make sure she sees it, Diana said, and I'll make sure everything in it is in the story. Jackson nodded. He walked back out into the afternoon. Dex was leaning against his bike, arms crossed, watching nothing in particular with the expression he wore when he was actually thinking about something specific. Looked up when Jackson came out. Done? He asked. Done, Jackson said. A pause. How does it feel? Jackson thought about that honestly. He thought about the highway yesterday afternoon, the open doors on the disabled SUV, the thin voice calling for help. 3 seconds he had sat on his bike and decided, like stopping was the right call, he said. Dex looked at him. Something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, not in a way that would have been visible to a stranger. Jackson saw it. 20-plus years of brotherhood had given him a fluency in Dex's silences that worked in both directions. She'd be proud of you, Dex said, quietly, without ceremony. Jackson was quiet for a moment. I know, he said, for the first time in 22 months, saying it did not feel like a loss. Felt like something held, something carried forward, something worth the road it had taken to get here. 48 hours that Diana Chen had promised turned into 31. Jackson found out at 6:14 in the morning, 2 days after Tucson, when his phone buzzed on the nightstand of the same Payson motel he had slept in before. Picked it up without thinking, the reflex of a man who'd spent the last 72 hours expecting calls at all hours and saw a text from a number he now recognized as Diana's. It's live, sending you the link now. He sat up in bed, clicked the link, watched the page load. The headline was not sensational. Diana Chen was not a sensational writer. She was a precise one. Precision, a story like this, was more devastating than drama could ever be. The headline read, Internal documents show, Meridian Industrial Canoe of chemical storage failure 4 days before fatal fire that killed 4 firefighters. Below it, the subheadline, County officials and safety inspectors named in evidence collected over 3 years by retired Arizona firefighter. He read the first 3 paragraphs. Then he put the phone down on his knee and sat in the quiet of the motel room and breathed. It was done. He called Thomas. Thomas answered on the second ring, which told Jackson that Thomas had also been awake. Saw it, Thomas said. His voice was different, not lighter exactly, because the weight of 3 years did not evaporate in a single morning, but different in the way the air is different after a long storm finally breaks. Something had released. Something that had been held under enormous pressure had found its way through. How are you? Jackson asked. Thomas was quiet for a moment. I keep thinking about James Wu's terrible cooking, he said. I keep thinking that I want to call someone, one of the wives, one of the families, and tell them. But it's 6 in the morning. Call them at 8, Jackson said. They've been waiting 8 years. Another 2 hours won't change what you need to say. No, Thomas agreed. It won't. A pause. Emily cried for about an hour last night. She thought I was asleep. I wasn't. Voice was rough around the edges in the way that had nothing to do with illness and everything to do with a father. Listening to his daughter cry through a wall and understanding that those were the right kind of tears, the releasing kind, the kind that meant something enormous had finally moved. Didn't go in. I thought she needed to do it alone. She did, Jackson said. Yeah, a long pause. Jackson, I want you to know something. Before all of this, before the phone calls and the motorcycles in Tucson, I'd started to think that maybe I'd been naive. 3 years of work was just a retired old man playing detective, and that the people who covered this up were always going to win because they had more money and more lawyers and more of everything that the world rewards. His voice steadied. You changed that, not just by helping us, by being the kind of man who helped us. Does that make sense? It makes sense, Jackson said. I'm not a man who says things I don't mean, Thomas said. So when I tell you that what you did matters not just for this story, not just for Daniel and Kevin and Robert and James, I need you to hear it as the full truth. Jackson was quiet for a moment. The motel room was still, and the morning was beginning outside, the particular early light of a day that did not yet know what it was going to become. Carol used to say that the best thing a person could do with their grief was turn it outward, Jackson said. She said that grief turned inward just became weight, but grief turned outward became she had a word for it. She called it fuel. He paused. I spent 2 years refusing to turn it outward. I thought writing was enough. I thought moving was the same as going somewhere. He stopped. Then it wasn't the same. This was the same. Thomas said nothing. Sometimes the most respectful response to something true was simply to receive it. Get some breakfast, Jackson told him. Call the families at 8. I'll see you this afternoon. He hung up. He did not go back to sleep. Instead, he did something he had not done in a very long time. He sat in a quiet room in the early morning and did not reach for noise to fill it. Sat with the silence and found that it was different from the silence he had been running from for 22 months. Silence had been hollow. This one was full, not full of happiness. It wasn't that simple. Life never was, but full of the particular weight of something completed. Something brought to the right place. Something set down at last. Thought about Carol for a long time. Not the end of Carol, not the hospital, not the last months, not the particular cruelty of watching someone you love disappear by increments. Thought about her at the beginning. The way she had looked at him when they first met, before she knew anything about who he was or what he did, the way that look had contained something completely open, completely undefended, completely unwilling to judge the surface before it knew the interior. He had fallen in love with her in that look. He had spent 30 years trying to be worthy of it, thought that maybe this was the closest he had come. By 9 o'clock in the morning, Diana Chen's story had been picked up by 4 national outlets. 10 o'clock, it was 11. By noon, a spokesperson for Meridian Industrial had released a statement calling the documents selectively presented and announcing their own internal review, which was the corporate equivalent of a man insisting the house was not on fire while smoke poured from every window. The statement was immediately and methodically dismantled in the comments section of every outlet that ran the story by people who had read the original documents which Diana had published in full, appendix to the main story, the chain of custody documentation attached, every email, every memo, every internal report with its date and its signature and its clear, unambiguous evidence of what had been known and when. The thing that could not be unprinted was now in the world. The world, it turned out, had opinions. Jackson was with Dex at a diner in Payson when his phone began doing something it had not done in years, ringing with numbers he did not recognize, back to back, persistent, the particular rhythm of a communication situation that had outgrown any individual's ability to manage it. Looked at the screen, then at Dex. Media? Dex asked, without looking up from his coffee. Think so, Jackson said. Don't answer, Dex said. Not yet. Not until Thomas has had time to talk to the families. Jackson put the phone face down on the table. It kept buzzing, patient and relentless. Drank his coffee. 20 minutes later, Emily texted him. Dad just got off the phone with Daniel Torres's wife. She said she's been waiting 8 years for someone to believe her husband's death wasn't an accident. She was crying. Dad was crying. I was crying. We're a mess over here. He texted back, good mess. Her response came immediately, the best kind. He was smiling at his phone, actually smiling. The real kind, the kind that arrived without invitation when Dex looked up and registered it and said nothing about it because Dex had the particular wisdom of a long friendship, which was the wisdom of knowing when to speak and when to simply note that something good was happening and let it happen without commentary. The second development of the morning that Jackson had not anticipated arrived in the form of a phone call from Sarah Okafor at 11:45. She was back, not on administrative leave back. Her employer had reversed the decision at 9 that morning, corresponded almost precisely to the moment the story had reached its 7th national pickup, and it had become clear to anyone watching that the administrative leave had been the result of outside pressure rather than genuine sourcing concerns. The reversal came with a carefully worded statement about the outlet's commitment to independent journalism. Sarah had read the statement, recognized it for what it was, institutional self-preservation dressed as principle, and accepted it without comment because what mattered was not the statement but the outcome. I'm writing a follow-up piece, she told Jackson, about the journalists who tried to tell this story over the years and were discouraged, about the systemic pattern of how Meridian handled their public relations, not just after the fire but before it. A pause. And I want to include something about you. About what happened on Highway 87, about what it took to get this story where it needed to go. No, Jackson said. A beat of silence, no? The story is about Daniel Torres and Kevin McAllister and Robert Jennings and James Wu, Jackson said. It's about Thomas Carter and 3 years of work and 4 families who deserved answers 8 years ago. Write about them. The story is also about how the truth found a way through, Sarah said. The way it found a way through matters. People need to know that it wasn't a law firm or a government agency or an official investigation that broke this. It was a retired firefighter and a biker who stopped on an empty road. Her voice was deliberate and clear. That is not a footnote, Mr. Cole. That is the story inside the story. Jackson was quiet. I won't make you a hero, Sarah said. I know that's not what you want. But I will tell the truth. That's what I do. He thought about what he had said to Emily in the hospital corridor, about the truth and what happened once it existed in the world. Thought about Thomas's face in the parking lot, when Diana Chen had said she had everything she needed. Thought about Carol telling him that grief turned outward became fuel. Write what's true, he said finally. That's all I ask. It's all I ever do, Sarah said. He hung up. What happened next happened not in a single moment, but in the accumulating way that things happen when a story reaches a size that exceeds the containers people have built for it. Corporate machinery of Meridian Industrial spent the first 12 hours trying to manage the narrative, issuing statements and deploying spokespersons, and calling in attorneys whose job it was to insert technical complexity between the public and the simple fact of what had happened. It was a strategy that had worked for them before. The fog of legal language, the suggestion of complexity where simplicity was damning, the implication that the documents required interpretation rather than the straightforward reading they plainly supported. Did not work this time. It did not work because Thomas Carter had spent 3 years making sure it wouldn't. Every document he had gathered included cross-references. Every email chain was complete, not excerpted, not pulled selectively, but reproduced in full so that the context was part of the record and could not be claimed to be missing. The internal reports that showed prior knowledge of the storage failure were accompanied by the safety inspection reports from the same period reports that bore the signatures of inspectors who were also named in the sealed envelope that had traveled against Jackson's chest from Payson to Tucson. When Meridian's attorneys suggested the documents were out of context, the context was already published. When they suggested the timeline was misrepresented, the time-stamped emails were in a downloadable appendix that anyone with internet access could open in 30 seconds. Thomas Carter had not built evidence. He had built a case. There was a difference, and the difference became apparent within 36 hours of a publication when the first Attorney General's office, Arizona, where the fire had occurred, announced a formal investigation. Jackson heard about the investigation from Thomas, who called him that evening, and the quality of Thomas's voice on that call was something Jackson would not forget easily. It was the voice of a man who had been holding his breath for 3 years and had finally been told he could breathe. They're investigating, Thomas said. Arizona G. called Sarah. They want the originals. They're already secured, Jackson said. Donna has the chain of custody documentation. It'll hold. I know it'll hold, Thomas said. Jackson, they're investigating. Do you understand what that means? I understand, Jackson said. The 4 families, Thomas said. His voice broke slightly on it, just slightly, then held. The 4 families are going to get answers, legal answers, official answers, the kind that go in a record and stay there and cannot be revised later by a corporation with enough money to revise things. He stopped. I genuinely thought there were weeks over the last 3 years where I thought this would never happen, that I would carry it until I died and it would die with me, and those 4 men would just be gone. Just gone. like the company wanted. They're not gone, Jackson said. No, Thomas agreed. They're not gone. The silence between them was the good kind, the kind that exists between people who have been through something real together and don't need to fill it with anything because the thing itself is filling enough. My daughter wants to talk to you, Thomas said. She's been wanting to since this morning, and she keeps making excuses not to call. Telling you now, so she doesn't have to work up to it. Jackson almost smiled. Put her on. A shuffling sound. Then Emily's voice, which had a quality he had not heard in it before, lighter, though not unserious. Relieved in a way that went bone deep. Hey, she said. Hey, he said. I've been trying to figure out what to say to you for about 6 hours, she said. Keep starting sentences, and they all feel insufficient. Then don't start one, he said. Just say what's true. Pause. Then you saved my father's life. And then you saved what my father spent 3 years building. And I was afraid of you when I first saw you. And I think about that a lot, about what would have happened if you were the kind of man I initially thought you were, which was a man who would have kept riding. What would have happened on that highway if you had kept riding? Her voice was quiet and very direct. And I want you to know that I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that you didn't. And I want you to know that I understand now what I didn't understand before, that the vest and the patches and the reputation are not the man. And I'm sorry for the 2 seconds where I let all of that be the man. Jackson was quiet for a moment. You don't owe me an apology for that, he said. You owe the next person you meet, whoever they are, whatever they look like, whatever you think you know about them, before you know them, an open look. That's all. Just look at the actual person. I will, Emily said. Promise. Good, he said. That's the whole thing right there. That's the only thing that changes anything. Another pause. Can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Are you okay? She asked. Not about this, about you. You told me about Carol. Told me about riding to outrun the silence. Are you okay? Jackson was surprised. Not by the question he had earned it, had given her the pieces to ask it, but by the way the question landed. Such plain sincerity, such absence of performance that deflecting it felt dishonest in a way he couldn't justify. Better, he said. That was the honest answer. Fine, fine, was a word for people who hadn't earned the distinction yet. Better. Measurably, specifically better. This helped, he said. Stopping helped. Staying helped. Being useful in a direction that wasn't just inward. He paused. Carol was right. She was right about the grief and the fuel and the turning it outward. I should have listened to her sooner. But I'm listening now. She sounds like she was remarkable, Emily said. She was the best person I ever knew, Jackson said simply. She would have liked you a great deal. She had a gift for recognizing people who did the right thing, even when it was hard. I'm not sure I've always done that, Emily said. You were in the desert yesterday, calling for help for your father instead of running for yourself, Jackson said. That's the right thing, even when it's hard. That's the whole definition. He heard her breath catch slightly, then steady. Okay, she said softly. Okay. They said goodbye and he hung up, and the motel room was quiet again, and outside the Arizona afternoon was in full heat, and he thought about Carol, and he thought about the highway, and he thought about the 3 seconds he sat on his bike, deciding whether to get off it. 3 seconds. Everything that had happened in the last 3 days had balanced on 3 seconds. Thought about how many times in a life there were moments, like that, moments where the decision lived in the space of a breath, where the entire future pivoted on whether you moved toward the thing or away from it. How many of those moments had he gotten right? How many had he missed? How many times had Carol been the one who made the right call when he would have made the cautious one? How many times had she been his compass and he had not adequately told her that? He told her now, quietly in the empty motel room, to the specific silence that she occupied in his life. Told her she was right. He told her he was trying. He told her that the road was still long, but that he was riding it with something he hadn't had when he left home 3 days ago, which was a reason that had nothing to do with escape. Didn't know if she heard him. He believed she did. The third day after publication brought 2 things that Jackson did not expect. The first was a call from brother Raymond, who told him that the story, Diana's story, Sarah's follow-up, 17 additional pieces that other journalists had filed in the wake of them, had made its way into the broader public conversation in a manner that was now including, consistently and specifically, the role of the Hells Angels members who had escorted the Carters to Tucson. Raymond's voice when he described this had a quality that Jackson recognized as something between bewilderment and something else, something that lived close to what a man felt when the world saw him more clearly. He had expected the world to be capable of seeing. People are saying things, Raymond said, online, about us, about I don't know how to describe it, Jackson. They're saying things that aren't the things they usually say. What are they saying? Jackson asked. Raymond was quiet for a moment, as though finding the right words for something unfamiliar. They're saying we're the good guys, he said simply, without elaboration. Jackson held the phone and let that sit for a moment. We were always the good guys, he said finally. Most of us. Most of the time. Yeah, Raymond said, but they didn't know that. Now they do, Jackson said. Does it change anything? Raymond asked. For you? Jackson thought about it honestly. He thought about Emily's 2 seconds of fear when she first looked up and saw him. Thought about the paramedic who had said good work without ceremony. He thought about Thomas shaking his hand in the dirt beside the highway and the particular quality of that handshake, the handshake of a man who was revising something in real time. Doesn't change who we are, Jackson said. It changes what people are willing to see. He paused. That's not nothing. That matters. Because if they're willing to see it now, they'll be more willing to see it next time. Time after that, he paused again, and maybe next time somebody needs help on an empty road, a few more people stop. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then, she'd be proud of you, Jackson. I know, Jackson said, I know. The second unexpected thing arrived not as a phone call, but as a knock on the motel room door at 4 in the afternoon, which was unusual enough that Jackson was on his feet and at the door with the wariness of a man who had spent 3 days in a situation that had trained him to treat the unexpected as information. He opened the door. Thomas Carter was standing there, alone, holding 2 cups of coffee from the place down the road, looking like a man who had spent the morning on the phone with families and attorneys and journalists and had finally come out the other side of it needing something simpler. Thought you were at Emily's rental, Jackson said. I was, Thomas said. Then I thought I'd come find you. See if you wanted coffee. He held up one of the cups. Unless you're busy. Jackson stepped back from the door. Come in, he said. Thomas came in. He handed Jackson the coffee. They sat Thomas in the only chair, Jackson on the edge of the bed, and for a while they didn't say much. They drank their coffee. Outside, the afternoon heat was doing what Arizona afternoon heat did, which was everything, absolutely everything, without apology. Neither of them minded. Men who had been sitting on desert highways in 110-degree temperatures recently had a different relationship with the heat than most. The AG's office called again, Thomas said eventually. They want me in Phoenix next week. Formal interview. Under oath. He said it with a calm that was the real kind, not the performed kind. I've been waiting 3 years to say these words, under oath in front of someone with the authority to act on them. Will it be hard, Jackson asked. Parts of it, Thomas said. The part where I describe what I found in the plant records what the conditions were, what the firefighters would have encountered. That part will be hard. He paused. The part where I say their names in an official proceeding, that part I've been rehearsing for 3 years. I'm ready for that part. Jackson nodded. My daughter is talking about writing something, Thomas said. Essay. About the experience. About what it's like to watch your father carry something like this, and then to watch it finally be set down. He glanced at Jackson. She wants to write about you. She's asked me whether she should. What did you tell her? Jackson asked. I told her that was a question for you, Thomas said. But I'll tell you what I think if you want it. Tell me, Jackson said. Thomas looked at him directly. I think the story of what you did on that highway is the kind of story that a lot of people need to read. Not because you're exceptional, I mean you are, but that's not the point. The point is that what you did was a choice. A simple choice. You could have kept writing, you didn't. He paused. People need to be reminded that choices like that are available to them every day. On roads that aren't literally desert highways, roads that are jobs and neighborhoods and bus stops and parking lots and all the places where people pass each other and make the calculation about whether to stop or keep going. He looked at Jackson steadily. You make it look like stopping is the obvious thing. Emily wants to tell people that it's available as the obvious thing. That's worth writing. Jackson considered that for a long moment. Tell her to write what's true, he said. The same thing he had said to Sarah, because it was the same answer always. Thomas nodded. That's what I thought you'd say. They finished their coffee. Thomas left at 5. Jackson sat alone for a while after, and then he did something that he had been turning over in his mind for the last 2 days without quite deciding. Picked up his phone and called a number he had not called in a very long time. Rang 4 times. Then a woman's voice, surprised, warm, complicated. Carol's sister, Marie. A voice that lived the specific geography of the people who had known Carol longest and grieved her the way only people who loved her from the beginning could grieve. Marie, he said, I'm sorry it's been so long. Don't apologize, she said immediately. Just talk to me. Tell me where you are, Arizona, he said. Payson, something happened out here. Something I want to tell you about. He paused. Something Carol would have wanted to know about. Tell me, Marie said. The same 2 words Thomas had used. The invitation of people who understood that some things needed to be said aloud to become fully real. He told her the whole thing. From the highway to the hospital to Tucson to the morning the story went live. He told it the way he had not told it to anyone in its complete form, not edited for efficiency, not compressed into operational summary, but told with the full weight of what it had meant to him from the inside. Told her about the 3 seconds on the bike. He told her about Emily's face when she first looked up. He told her about Thomas's handshake in the desert dirt. He told her about holding 4 names against his chest in a sealed envelope on the back of a motorcycle riding through the desert. Told her what Thomas had said about Carol's name being the combination on the case. And when he got to that part, Marie made a sound that was not quite a word, and he stopped talking for a moment and let her make it. She would have loved this, Marie said when she could speak. Jackson, she would have, you know what she would have said, right? You know exactly what she would have said. Tell me anyway, he said. She would have said, there you are, Marie told him. What she would have said. She always said that about you, that the you actually were only came completely through when someone needed something. She said, the rest of the time you were just present, that in those moments you were fully there. A pause. She would have looked at everything you just described and said, there you are, Jackson. He sat with that for a long moment. There you are. Thank you, Marie, he said. His voice was not entirely steady. He did not try to make it entirely steady. Come see me, she said. Soon, whenever you're ready. Come for dinner. She would want that. I will, he said. I promise. He hung up. Sat in the motel room with the evening coming on outside, and Carol's sister's voice still in his ears and the particular fullness of a day that had given more than he had known to ask for. And he breathed in the quiet of it. There you are. 5 days later, Jackson Cole rode out of Payson in the morning. He had said goodbye to Thomas at breakfast, a real breakfast, the kind where they had taken their time, where the coffee had been refilled twice and the conversation had moved easily between the serious and the ordinary, the way conversation does, between people who have stopped needing to be careful with each other. Thomas had looked healthy, more than healthy, solid, in a way that went deeper than physical recovery. The solidity of a man who had set down a weight he had been carrying for years and was discovering, in the absence of it, what he was like when his hands were free. Where are you headed? Thomas had asked. South, Jackson had said. Then west. I'll ride until I want to stop. Same as before, Thomas said. Not the same, Jackson said. Before I was riding away from something. Now I'm just riding. Thomas had studied him. And when you stop, what then? Don't know yet, Jackson said. And for the first time in a very long time, not knowing did not feel like loss. Felt like the road ahead, which was exactly what it was, open, long, full of the unpredictable weather of real life, his to ride at whatever pace the next thing required. He had said goodbye to Emily separately, outside on the sidewalk, while Thomas settled the breakfast bill with the authority of a man who intended to win that particular argument. Emily had hugged him. Simply and without preamble, stepped forward and put her arms around him the way people do when they have shared something that has made the usual social choreography feel inadequate. He had hugged her back the way a man does when he recognizes that the gesture is the right one and he is not going to be too guarded to receive it. When she stepped back, her eyes were bright. The essay goes live next week, she said, terrified. Don't be, he said. You're telling the truth. Truth doesn't need you to be brave for it to work. It just needs you to say it. She smiled at him. It was the first time he had seen her smile without something else underneath it, without the fear or the tension or the managed composure of someone holding multiple things at once. Just the smile itself, clean and complete. I'll send you the link, she said. I'll read it, he said. He got on his bike. The road south out of Payson was the same road he had been riding north when everything changed. The same highway, the same desert, the same heat beginning to gather in the morning air, with the patient inevitability of an Arizona summer. He rode past mile marker 97. He slowed without quite deciding to. The way you slow when you pass a place that holds a specific weight, not to stop, not to mark it with ceremony, but to acknowledge it, to let the acknowledgement exist for a moment before the speed took it behind him. He did not stop. He was not running anything down, and he was not running anything away. He was riding. There was a difference, and the difference was everything. And he had learned it over 3 days on an Arizona highway that had started with a voice calling for help and ended with a story in the world that could not be taken back. He thought about what Thomas had said at breakfast. Not the same, just riding. The distinction had seemed obvious to Jackson when he said it. Sitting with it now, with the engine under him and the road ahead and the desert on both sides, he understood it more fully. Before, the riding had been a response, a reaction, something he was doing, because the alternative, standing still inside his own life, was more than he could manage. Was motion in the place of direction, speed in the place of purpose. He had known that, somewhere below the knowing he admitted to himself. But the knowledge had not yet found the leverage it needed to change anything. Now it had leverage. Now the riding was itself, not escape, not anesthesia, not the roar of an engine loud enough to drown out what lived in the quiet. Just the road and the morning, and a man who had somewhere become, again, the person Carol had always seen when she looked at him. Phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He left it there. Whoever it was could wait. He was riding. Hours south of Payson, he stopped at a gas station not from necessity. The tank was fine, because something made him pull in and stop and stand beside his bike in the morning heat for a moment. Bought a bottle of water. He drank half of it standing next to the pump. Find a tat had. He looked at the highway. An older couple was sitting at a picnic table outside the station. The kind of couple that had clearly been together long enough that they had stopped needing to perform company for each other. They were sitting quietly, drinking coffee from paper cups, watching the road the way people watch things that they find beautiful without needing to say so. The woman said something to the man. He laughed. Not a big laugh, a small private one, the kind that belongs entirely to the two people sharing it. Jackson watched them for a moment. He thought about Carol, thought, I had that. For 30 years I had exactly that, and I knew it was the most important thing in my life while I had it, and I still don't feel like I told her enough times that I knew. He finished his water. He got back on his bike. He made a decision that was not dramatic and did not announce itself as a turning point, but was one anyway, the way the real turning points always were quiet, eternal, product of something that had been building for longer than the moment in which it arrived. Decided that when he got home, whenever that was, wherever the road took him before, it took him home, he was going to stop running the clock out on the people he loved who were still here. He was going to call Marie back and go to dinner, actually go. Not just say he would. He was going to call his brothers more often, not when he needed something, but just to be in contact, because contact was its own thing, and he had been stingy with it since Carol died, as though conserving the energy of connection would somehow offset the cost of having lost the connection that mattered most. Didn't work that way. Carol had told him it didn't work that way. He had understood it intellectually at the time and had proceeded to not live it, because grief had its own logic and its own stubbornness, and the intellectual understanding of a thing was not the same as the lived understanding of it. He understood it now. From the inside, he understood it because of Thomas, who had spent 3 years miting for 4 men he had loved instead of retreating into the private geography of his own loss. He understood it because of Emily, who had sat beside her father through 3 years of risk and kept showing up. He understood it because of Dex, who had gotten in his car in the middle of the night and driven to a hospital parking lot because Jax had said he needed help No other explanation required. He understood it because of a woman named Donna who had driven through the dark to a document facility because what she was carrying mattered, and doing things that matter was reason enough. The world was full of people who showed up. He just needed reminding. Pulled his phone out at the next stop sign and checked the buzzing from earlier. It was a text from a number he didn't recognize, Arizona area code. He opened it. My name is Kevin McAllister Jr. I'm Kevin McAllister's son. I read the story this morning. I've been trying to find the right words for 6 hours. I think the only ones that work are thank you. My father deserved to have the truth told. You helped make sure it was. Thank you. Jackson read the text twice, sat at the stop sign for a moment that lasted longer than stop signs were designed for. Car came up behind him, waited patiently, and he pulled forward and off to the side to give it room to pass. Typed back, your father was a good man. The world knows that now. I'm glad. He put the phone away. He sat for another moment with Kevin McAllister Jr.'s words in his chest alongside Daniel Torres's daughters and Robert Jennings' lieutenant's career and James Wu's terrible cooking that everyone had eaten. Anyway, because that's what you do for people you love. Sat with all four of them, and he sat with the weight of what it meant that their families had been waiting 8 years for someone to believe what they already knew. Then he started his bike and he rode. Not away from anything, not toward any particular place. Toward the road itself had and what was in it, and whatever the next version of a moment, like mile marker 97, turned out to be the next open door. The next thin voice, the next 3 seconds in which a man on a motorcycle made the decision that separated the life he was living from the life he was supposed to live. He would stop next time too. He had always known he would stop. That was who he was. But now he knew it the way you know things when you have not just believed them in theory, but carried them through the test, when the knowing has moved from your head into your body, into your hands, into the specific muscle memory of a man who has gotten off his bike when the world needed him to. He rode through the rest of the Arizona morning with the desert on both sides and the sky enormous overhead and the engine doing what it had always done, which was carry him forward. The story had been told. The 4 men had their truth. The families had their answers. The people responsible were no longer protected by the silence that money could buy, because the silence had been broken in 5 places simultaneously on a Tuesday morning in August. The breaking of it had made a sound loud enough to reach attorney generals and newsrooms, and the homes of 4 families who had spent 8 years being told that what they knew was not what happened. Thomas Carter had spent 3 years building something that one afternoon on a desert highway had found its way into the hands of a man who would carry it to the right place. Jackson Cole had spent 2 years riding away from a grief that one afternoon on a desert highway had finally turned outward into something that could move in the world and leave a mark. Somewhere on a road between Payson and wherever came next, a man in a leather vest with silver in his hair and a dead woman's love still active in him, like a compass, rode forward into a morning that was his, fully his, without the weight of running and without the hollowness of escape. He rode because the road was still long and the world still needed people who stopped. He rode because Carol had been right and he was finally living it. He rode because nobody got left behind on his road. That was who he was. That had always been who he was. The only difference was that now the world knew it too.